Okay, welcome everyone. We're officially going to be in public session. Welcome to brand new Waterfront Toronto. Stunning, gorgeous offices overlooking the lake. Just a fabulous location for us to contemplate the future of the waterfront. So it's really great to finally be here in person. So welcome to those who are joining us online. And I believe we have one member of the public today, Oliver from the Waterfront BIA. Welcome, Oliver. Thanks a lot. Okay, so just a few little preliminaries first. Approval of minutes from January 31st. Betsy moves it. David seconder. Okay. Day's agenda. 2 items: Quayside Master Plan preliminary draft plan, and then the Parliament slip activation, which is here for issues identification. Are there any declaration of conflicts of interest from any panel members?
I have a conflict for the Quayside project, so I will be abstaining from attending that session.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
Well, Matthew isn't here, but I think he's conflicted for Quayside as well.
Matthew?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll note that. Thank you. Okay. All right. Updates. Waterfront Toronto. Chris, any updates you want to share at this point in time?
We have a couple. You want to do our land acknowledgement, Paul?
Yeah, the land acknowledgement. The Waterfront Toronto acknowledges that the land upon which we are undertaking our revitalization efforts is part of the traditional territory that was Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13. Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. In addition, Waterfront Toronto acknowledges that Toronto historically been a gathering place for many Indigenous people, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee. Peoples in its home, many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples today. Chris?
Okay.
Oliver just couldn't hear from the back. So
I know it's a problem.
Huh?
You want to go through the agenda, Paul?
I just did.
Oh, you did? Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, I think Paul already did.
Oh, Paul already did. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Yeah.
I saw it on the screen. Thought there was more to say. So there was only one item at last month's design review panel, and I was not actually in attendance. So it was the 396 Queens Quay schematic design. I think the panel made some suggestions around some of the massing, and I'm going to talk to Amelia about whether or not there's any opportunity to act on any of those recommendations at this point in time. Portland's flood protection. I think everyone knows we've filled up the river. Here's a kind of like watch it rise sequence of photos. It really, if you haven't been out there, is kind of amazing. You can really see the river in a way that was very hard to imagine it before it had water in it. And it's gotten quite a bit of media coverage, and I think created a fair bit of enthusiasm and excitement. It's just about full. I'm not sure it's even quite full yet. It's going to stay just swimming pool for the next couple of months until we're ready to take out the west plug, which will connect it to the lake. And then
Video here. Awesome.
yeah, and then eventually we'll connect it to the river by the end of the year. So yeah, let's do the video.
Make sure the sound is working. Let's give me 1 second.
Flood protection project. I'm here to tell you all about the new mouth of the Don River. We recently finished filling up the dry riverbed we built with water. We pumped in enough water to fill up 30 Olympic swimming pools, or the equivalent of 2 billion marshmallows. We've been working towards this for years. It's a huge milestone. It didn't look that exciting while we were doing it. It was a very slow process, but here's why it's so cool.
We call it a new river because it's new to us. But did you know that there was a river here before humans even evolved? A deep channel in the bedrock shows that the river was here as many as 3 million years ago. It's only in the last century or so that the river was channelized and this area was filled in. Now we're putting it back. While the riverbed looks flat to the naked eye, it actually changes in elevation by as much as 2.5 meters. The rocks on the riverbed were carefully selected to be small and varied enough to provide spawning habitat for fish, but not so small that they'll be carried away by water into the lake. Everything you see in this river valley is designed for a flood, which means that everything's tied down or anchored in some way. There are also deeper areas on the outside of the river's curves. These sections are the pools in what's called a riffle pool sequence, a naturally occurring pattern on the bottom of natural rivers that we've recreated. To the current lake level, about 74.7 meters above sea level. But the river valley is designed to handle a lot more water in the event of a major storm.
Now that Commissioner Street is open, you can come and have a look at the river valley yourself. Now you can see water under the bridge too.
This drill she should do was a drill.
Yeah.
She's really good at it.
Yeah, I know.
Get you excited about it.
Are you looking at the north one?
Nice.
All right, so
Great.
Yeah, give a round of applause.
okay.
Is that
Um,
nothing
I
else?
think that's it on the updates front.
Yep, just a quick overview of March and April. So
Oh, yeah.
tentatively, we're looking at, for March, Villiers Island Density and Massing Study will come back for information. We will begin the first review for McCleary District Precinct Plan. Also part of Portland's, West Donlands Block 13, so that one's still on the agenda. And Basin Media Hub is coming back for the third review at detailed design. For April, we are going to be looking at Waterfront East LRT, the Young Slip Stretch, and then 1 to 7 Young, phase 4 and 5. So there's been a redesign for that. We've seen this project before at schematic design, and they're going to come back because the design has substantially changed.
So, full day meeting, it looks like, eh?
Yeah, so far.
Yeah, so far. Yeah.
Okay, so we're ready for the first item then? Anything else, Lena?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Quayside Master Plan Preliminary Draft Plan, who is gonna do the
So let
introduction?
me, they're all just sitting outside.
Right.
So I'm gonna,
And I don't know what we can do about it. That's the problem.
yeah. The mic.
You and I need to bring this up.
So the other slide shot.
Yeah.
Hear better?
Doing that.
I am not sure who's doing the introduction. We have no lectern, Pina, so you can stand there at that chair, or you can sit at, are you doing the intro?
Nope.
Oh, you're not. No, I'm sorry.
You were-
Oh, you're not doing the intro. Okay. Well, then just come and have a seat. But sit up here because you can't
No,
hear
have a
anything
seat.
down there.
Just so people know if they're watching, that we're not quite organized yet, so we're just getting people settled.
We don't have a lectern, but it's. Oh, it just hasn't arrived?
Oh.
Are you signed into
Too far behind. So, yeah.
Not very well.
Well, you know, this is all new. I knew this was gonna happen on
Yeah.
our first try in the new space.
Wow. So all those people sit at the table.
Oh, yeah.
I may end up running out. So
You're gonna need an extension cord. We'll get you one.
We just have to wait a few more minutes to get set up.
Sorry, everyone.
There's no problem.
I didn't do that.
You want to have a lectern, there's got-
Sure.
I didn't hear, and then if I use the clicker, then
Yeah.
I'm all good.
No problem.
Yes.
Yeah, we're all good.
Yeah, welcome.
That's you too. That's. Good, how are you? Good. I had a good chat with Allison Reed last week.
There's no outlet.
Should be plugged in now.
Yeah.
Try that.
Invading all the space here.
We're still working it out.
Probably easier. Oops, drop down more. You gonna be presenting? Yeah, next screen next. Yes, okay.
We're gonna go first. Chris, we're gonna go first, and then he's gonna go.
Okay.
So I'll share first, and then we'll share. Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
As long as he's connected, I think it should be good.
Yeah, you can just plug, when you're ready to go, just plug that in from the side. So I need that and the team, because I'm gonna be sharing screen. She's joined on team. Do I need the HDMI?
You don't need it. Yeah. It's like.
I think.
All right. He's doing a lot of presentations.
Stand here.
You know, set?
Yeah.
Just one more second.
Bear with us, folks. This is our first time doing this in the new space, and we're having to figure some things out as we go.
It's right here. I got it.
It's worth waiting. You got the clicker?
I don't know what's the best.
Whatever you want to do. Well, there was supposed to be a little seat there
Yeah,
for you.
Well, it's probably. I don't know. I think it's probably hard to sit. I can just stand.
What about a normal
Unless it's- We already stand in the corner here?
Yeah.
Should work. Should work. Okay. Okay. All right. We're ready.
Are we set?
I think so. Yeah.
All right, sorry for the interruption here, but I think we're set.
All right.
Go ahead.
Hi,
Introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm the Director of Development at Waterfront Toronto, and together with Leon, Design Review Manager, we're going to give a brief staff intro to Quayside Impact Master Plan presentation today. Been about a year, I think, since they were last here, so I'm going to give context again. I'll try to go a little more quickly than I did the last time we did this. But just as a reminder, the last time Quayside Impact was here, they presented on master plan, the urban design guidelines, and 3 of the first buildings on the site for issues ID. Today they're just here for stage 2 preliminary draft plan, which is a reflection of where they are in the planning approval process, which is sort of finalizing the zoning and working towards an approval on the rezoning. Minor technical hiccup. And the laptop.
All right.
Yeah, I'll bring the laptop.
Just advance it from here.
Sure.
You can take a chair and advance it on a chair. That will be easier.
Yeah. Sorry, I gotta hold my coffee. All right. No worries. Just again, as a reminder, Quayside is a 12-acre parcel at the foot of Parliament and Front Street, or Parliament and Lakeshore Boulevard. Actually, I think everyone just did a tour. You can actually see the site now from the other side of the office. Pretty fun. And Waterfront Toronto kind of envisioned this site at some pretty high aspirations for what we wanted to do here that reflected our new kind of corporate objectives. And we wanted to really build a vibrant and accessible neighborhood. So that's what you see kind of in the coming slides. Again, site condition, which you can see from inside the neighborhood. Reminder of the planning policies and the planning context. This is three major planning pieces here. The Central Waterfront Secondary Plan, of course. And the site is supported by both the East Bayfront Precinct Plan as well as the Keating Channel Precinct Plan. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but some of the major big moves that those precinct plans identified. So removing barriers and making connections, building a network of spectacular waterfront parks and public spaces, promoting clean and green environments, and creating dynamic and diverse new communities. So again, I think when we went out with the RFQ and RFP for Quayside, we took those policies and we built on them and what we wanted to see and what we asked for in the procurement documents. So again, we wanted to see a dynamic neighborhood that was activated all year round. We wanted to build an inclusive place with plenty of affordable housing and opportunities to age in place. We wanted a resilient neighborhood that was, leading in terms of sustainability and other aspects along that vein. Because we're the design review panel, just a bit more detail on some of the design objectives that we asked for in the RFP. So we asked for a comprehensive and unifying vision, and more specifically, we asked for cohesive diversity. We wanted to see the designs respect and represent the waterfront character of the site. Wanted to see iconic architecture. And finally, we wanted to see sustainability as a design expression as well. We also asked for several ground floor design related objectives. So we asked for the ground floor to be holistic but distinct. And we really wanted the ground floor to seamlessly blend with the public realm. As well as providing opportunities for a diverse and distinct set of retailers to thrive and flourish on the site.
This is a continuation.
And this was a block plan that we included in the RFQ itself, sort of an evolution of what was included in the precinct plans. This wasn't obviously what we expected the bids to look like. We were just putting something out there to help inspire some inspiration. And this was the master plan and the ground floor plan that Quayside Impact included in their winning RFP bid, as well as what they would have shown the DRP back in January of last year, just as a reminder. Just quickly update on sort of the timeline here. In June 2023, Quayside Impact submitted seven planning applications. They're now working towards finalizing their rezoning. So they received feedback from staff at the city, and they've incorporated that now, and it's what they're bringing here to show you today. And then they're hoping to submit the next rezoning application in March. With a hopeful approval in the summer, and then depending on timelines, we're looking at end of this year or later 2024 for the SPA resubmissions. And Leon will give a bit more detail later in terms of how these various elements will come back to DRP, the timelines associated with that in a few minutes. Again, just some of the existing and future development context. So the site is bordered by the completed Mound on the west and the future silo site on the east. Again, you can kind of see the existing context. So, blocks 1 and 2 pretty much ready to go. Those contain the buildings that they presented on last time. Blocks 3, 4, and 5 require significant infrastructure and public realm work being delivered by Waterfront Toronto to physically create the blocks and make them development ready. And here is a map and an overview of the various public improvements that Waterfront Toronto will be delivering as part of this project. I think most significantly, we'll be filling in the Parliament slip, building Queen's Quay so it continues to the east, and sort of reorienting Parliament Street so it physically creates block 3 B, Block 4, and Block 5. So it's quite a significant public realm program that we'll be delivering. Just a few images of that as well. Here's a concept of the future Queens Quay with the LRT right away. Here's the broader transportation network that will be in this area. So the Waterfront East LRT, the Ontario line, and the 504 extension. Some images of the future Lakeshore Public Realm implementation. And the future Keating Channel pedestrian bridge, which will connect Block 5 on Quayside, the future promontory park on Villiers Island, and Parliament Slip. This is obviously the old design. We didn't want to ruin the surprise as it's coming later. You'll see the updated design then, but just a bit more context as well. That.
Thanks, Michael. So there are various components to Quayside. I just want to remind everyone what we have previously saw at the panel and what will come in the future. So last year in January 2023, we saw the master plan, the urban design guidelines, community forests, as well as blocks 1A, 1B, and 1C all come for issues ID. It was a double session and we kind of saw it all together bundled. Today, we're looking at specifically the master plan, zoning the master plan, and then the urban design guidelines, community forests, the 3 blocks will come back later for their stage 2 review. So there's more opportunities to look at the architectural and landscape design, those pieces. And then of course, the subsequent phases, including blocks 2, 3, 4, and 5, those will have a competition to select the winner. And then they will kind of begin their ERP process with us. So today, the team will be focusing on addressing the zoning, showing the panel the zoning envelope and the massing of where the master plan is at. Previously, we have received many comments from the panel that was, that pertain to the mapping, but also to the landscape and architecture design. So we're just highlighting some of the pieces that are more relevant to today's discussion. We're bringing out some of the other comments which we will continue to track for next time. So for the master plan, the panel commended the 5 core guiding principles of the overall vision. There was general support on the master plan massing. The panel wanted to see more detail on access, parking, service, and the consolidation strategy, provide north-south sections, the overall site to the water, also consider the relationship proposal with the surrounding neighborhood, specifically views from the St. Lawrence neighborhood. Also provide shadow studies to understand the relationship between built form and the pubs. Buildings, again, commended the building design innovation displayed at the conceptual stage of the project. There's a comment on the street wall, calibrating it for human scale, consider the size of the openings along Queens Quay, and ensuring that there's a fine grain of retail for businesses in the future. Also, some concerns on the quality of space under the timber house cantilevers. The Roman landscape, general support on the urban farm concept. So for today, we would like the panel to consider the following. Do the proposed zoning envelopes support the objectives and vision of the Quayside Master Plan? The zoning envelopes provide flexibility that allows architectural innovation while ensuring key waterfront built form policies are achieved. Does the ground floor footprint provide opportunities for rich, fine-grained experience along Queens Quay? City, we would like you to consider changes to the timber house massing and portals from the perspectives of design excellence, views, pedestrian experience, connectivity, microclimate, design approaches to supporting the ground floor retail vision. interaction between ground floor and public ground, including Parliament Plaza, Community Forest, and Quayside public ground. And also considerations to support the ground floor uses serving an inclusive mixed-use community and also a waterfront destination. So that's the end of our introduction. Move on to Ben Hoff to begin the design presentation. Before that, let me just ask Tony, your team, to introduce the people that are here today. We also have city staff here from planning and urban design. So I think many staff on the call here today. Tony, would you like to give a quick intro to?
No, I don't have much to say. I mean, on behalf of Dream and Greg Golf, we're very excited to be here. Very early stage for the project and making sure that, you know, we're following through on the original vision as it relates to the entitlements approach here, working with our partners at the city and Waterfront Toronto. So we have majority of our team members here and online. Unfortunately, Greg from Henny Larson held ill today, and we couldn't get another person from Henny Larson to join us. So Ben's going to do his best to sort of you know, cover his slides, but apologies for that. But we're excited to hear your comments. Thank you.
Leon, do you allow me to share? Yeah. We give you presentation access. How's that? Okay. All right.
Hey, hi folks. As Tony mentioned, Ben Hoff, Urban Strategies planner and partner with the firm. Happy to be here and happy to be stepping in for Greg Haley, who is going to present actually a good portion of this content. So bear with me. I'm not a designer, so I won't speak as eloquently to some of the design elements of the proposal. But I am very excited and pleased to be presenting on the refinements to the Quayside master plan, and in particular the kind of the overall big moves and structuring elements that are part of the zoning, the zoning intentions for Quayside. And then I think you'll probably get a little bored with all the various buildings that will continue to come back in public realm through the site plan processes, but we'll be equally excited to be there when we're getting into the details of all that. So just very quickly from a teaming perspective, this is a large team and a complex partnership, including a development partner with Waterfront Toronto, Dream and Great Golf, representing QILP, what we call, and the host nation of MCFN and the City of Toronto, delivering also on affordable housing and the current landowner of part of Quayside, and a very rich design team that I'm proud to work with, including a variety of architects across the block, and some of which you'll hear from today, including Rasmus, who is very large here on the screen right beside me, Astrup of SLA, and Kamal Benoit of Ajay Associates.
Good morning. My camera is not working for some reason. But...
Okay, great. So just very quickly, just a summary of the applications themselves. So there are actually two different rezoning and official plan amendment applications. Application one, what I call Quayside West, is in purple here, and that's kind of the first phase of development. That's also called blocks 1 and 2. And then the yellow is blocks 3 and 4, and that's the kind of longer term development of those blocks that have yet to be created through the plan of subdivision process. You'll see block 5 doesn't actually have massing on here because No concept is being advanced at this stage. That will be advanced in the future when the concept for Block 5 actually emerges. But kind of focusing on the purple area here, what we also have are 4 site plan applications for 3 buildings, and then what we call a master site plan application for the ground floor and below grade for the entirety of the block. These are those applications that will be moving forward in the future, including resubmissions later this year, and will come forward for DRP review at a kind of a detailed architectural design perspective, including the community forest aspect that Rasmus will speak to today. So it's a complex application. Right now, we're really focusing on the finalizing the zoning and official plan amendment applications. So very quickly, Quayside by the numbers. I think the big number is 869 affordable housing units. That's what this is all about. But we can do that and deliver affordable housing in a way that delivers on all other aspects that contribute to a complete community, including a whole variety of residential units with a large proportion of family-sized units. New retail space, in particular along Queens Quay, but childcare and community spaces, potential office spaces, and a whole really rich offering of public realm spaces within the block and around the edges delivered by Waterfront Toronto. So this is from the original proposal. The project overview is around a mixed-use community with a whole variety of uses to allow for the development of a complete community, including what will be an exciting opportunity on Block 5. That it's inclusive and welcoming, that it's dynamic and it's rich, and it's not just a street wall and residential behind it. It's a rich community that invites you into the public realm, in and up into the buildings and uses within them. And then it's vibrant and has uses throughout the year that really activates 365 days a year the waterfront, including in some of the important public spaces along the waterfront that will emerge at the foot of Parliament. And then finally, resilient, including targeting to be first zero carbon community at this scale and one of the largest residential mass timber buildings, the Timber House. Just very quickly, here's a snapshot of some of the details of the architecture that's emerging, including the Allison Brooks curve building, in building 1A, we call it, in the upper left, the Henning Larsen overstory building in the upper right, and the urban farm and timber house, Ajay Associates, and just some of the excitement and enthusiasm for those buildings and the design that will be kind of coming toward to the DRP in the future. So stepping back to the master plan level, just looking at the site. Site is, historically, looking back, not actually that long ago, but historically is actually being within the water itself, and now has emerged at the water's edge. And where the river, where the Don River meets the waterfront. And it's important to kind of remember this place of the site and the potential that it has to engage with all aspects. The history of the site, both its kind of recent history, but it's a much longer history on the water's edge of a place that's been occupied for time immemorial, but also to engage with the city around it and the natural heritage of the mouth of the Don River and the emerging Villiers Island naturalization of that mouth. So a rich point to engage in, and a rich community of neighborhoods that surround it, that we're directly connecting to in some cases with Villiers Island and soon to emerge Keating Channel community, as well as some of the existing communities, distillery districts to the north, and the West Donlands, including the large affordable housing program that's emerging there, and then obviously the successful East Bayfront that we're within today, and contributing to the richness of those communities and contributing the richness of the waterfront programming and activation throughout the year. And these are summertime pictures, but I think we will be providing those wintertime pictures that will with the build out of Quayside that demonstrate the diversity of animation throughout the year. but also then plugging in much greater detail to the intentions that Waterfront Toronto has around kind of extending an urban and green landscape with a focus on Parliament Street, the foot of Parliament, and how it connects over and literally will bridge over to Villiers Island. And that happens at a granular scale. So many of those connections, in particular the pedestrian connections and public spaces, touch the edges of Quayside. And the master plan has been very intentionally designed to connect to and extend this pattern of linkages from the water's edge through up to the first Parliament site and the new transit station that will come there, but also those kind of smaller scale granular connections, the mid-block pops that are emerging and connecting east-west and really contributing a substantial new space to those places. Very simply, Quayside is a neighborhood. It's a local neighborhood for a lot of residents that will live together and share spaces together on the site, but also a destination where Parliament meets Queen's Quay, and a significant investment in retail and cultural and open spaces that will occur at this destination. The kind of structuring elements of this, including are as follows. We're defining edges, responding to the water's edge and the public realm aspects of that, to Queen's Quay and the renewed vision of Queen's Quay in the lighter blue, and then also Lakeshore Edge. We've got a tough edge with Lakeshore and the Gardiner. And the program and public realm in particular responds to that. Another element is the Green Heart and an extension of a large series of connected open spaces that seamlessly link across Quayside, but are protected by the Quayside development itself and create this really unique space within the heart of the buildings. Being strategic about where density goes, pushing that density, up against the Gardiner, giving building separation, tower separation to allow for sky view and considering relationships around facing distances to allow for density to happen here without impacting the experience at grade. And then vertical communities and having that opportunity for community to develop and be linked in the buildings, up through the buildings, onto the rooftops, and programming throughout. Each of the buildings connects in different ways, including the idea of the Allison Brooks, the curved building, really framing the major open space, the community forest, and creating some protection for the community forest at grade. Buildings 1B and 1C, then providing an opportunity to connect and have programming within them that provides for the community in the broader neighborhood. And then the timber house along Queen's Quay, really extending that edge of Queen's Quay, creating a really strong urban street wall with retail spaces, but then opportunities for their porosity to allow for people to connect to and engage within the site. Very quickly, this was the Quayside concept plan that was submitted with the application, including the long timber house lining Queen's Quay and the urban park on its roof, and then a series of 5 towers within the 4 blocks that extend along the northern edge of the site on the north side of that community forest that extends all the way from Bonnie Castle through to Parliament Street and the Parliament plazas that are being designed by Waterfront Toronto, and then connecting down into Silo Park, Parliament Slip, and the waterfront itself. At grade, the program was intended to align with the kind of public realm investment. So it's public realm first, with Queen's Quay being an important public space for all, but welcoming all as well into the community forest. And so retail that animates Queen's Quay but wraps around the base building. And then institutional and community-focused uses, and in some cases in the dark yellow, amenity areas, then providing continuous animation around that community forest space. Through the master plan refinement process and discussions with Waterfront, with City, and with the public and other stakeholders, We've introduced some changes. From a built form perspective, it's really been tinkering. So block 1C, the timber house has been raised in height to accommodate structural considerations. Kamal will kind of cover that. Block 4 has been refined, including pushing back the podium to create more space at grade and rejigging the massing. Some changes, adjustments in building heights. But the real changes have been at the ground floor, and the ground floor plan, including consolidating the ramp and taking it off Bonnie Castle and putting it to the north to ensure that there's kind of a continuous safe pedestrian connection along the Bonnie Castle edge, shown in 1 on this drawing. In number 2 on this drawing, the reduction of the size of the pickup and drop off areas. There's more space for the community, of course, and less impact on that. And number 3 is optimizing the size of the portal spaces. So making sure that they're aligned with the spaces through to Beacon Place Park. It's nice to be talking about something so close by. And to balance that with the retail intentions of having animation and retail on Queens Quay. And then a whole series of other changes and adjustments to setback to base building conditions. So we have increased setbacks and more pedestrian space at grade, including particularly at pinch points. From a circulation perspective, that kind of consolidation of circulation has really happened mostly on block 1 and 2, where its access is coming off Lakeshore, not off Bonnie Castle. And really tightened up to 3 access points for the entirety of Quayside, which is an ambitious approach. Or sorry, I should say 4, because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. But an ambitious approach to consolidating vehicle use and not impacting the public realm, particularly on Queens Quay, but then also on the side streets where they're secondary streets where they have a relationship to the community forest. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rasmus to talk about the public. And Rasmus, you just let me know.
I'm a bit scared of my big face, but can you hear me?
Yep.
So you can both hear and see me then. Okay, then. So yeah, as you could hear from Ben, who very humbly called himself not a designer. I think his presentation proved him wrong, but nevertheless, here is again a reminder of the diversity of experiences that we were thinking of when we made the master plan. There is a reason why we made a community forest. That was because it was something that we felt would contribute positively to all of the other experiences that you can accomplish on the waterfront. It was on the base of supporting that variety, that sequence of spaces. It was, of course, also based on the biodiversity strategy, as you saw before, also from Ben, but we really wanted to create something and that belonged to that entire block, and that is why we call it a community forest. It's true that you saw the diagram before, that there is a private or more neighborhoody thing and a more destination one near the Silo Park, but it's completely open. It's everyone are welcome in to the community forest, and that goes back to the whole choice you can see on the map in front of you. Are you in the mood for a more retail-oriented shopping trip along Queens Quay Boulevard? Do you want to stroll along the water promenade? If that's what you feel like, or is it the day where you want to cross from Parliament Plaza into community forest, and you can actually cross through the existing building and continue your journey east to west? So it's about the sequence of different opportunities and the connectivity between them that has led to the programming in the master plan. Next. Thank you. And here you have the render from inside the courtyard and a view of a playground activity. You have the more community hub orientated active ground floor, and more F&B orientated on the right side. And you can see here that it is a unique atmosphere, and you could also imagine it's a different soundscape, even though you are quite close to Lakeshore Boulevard. You will hopefully hear more birds than cars when you're in such a community forest. And it will be this vibe of a place that belongs both to all of the citizens that will live there, but also being a new area that you can stroll in and enjoy as a citizen of Toronto itself. And as mentioned in the intro, we've been through other iterations, other meetings and DRP sessions regarding the planting, but this is in essence an interpretation of the Carolinian forest that will, by all of the initiatives we have taken, grow very largely under the circumstances we have here. Next, please. So in that forest, there are different community happenings of program. Right now you can see how they are organized. Some of them, for instance, the major playground, which was also represented in the image shown before, seems like a logic thing to be in a more protected location. We have some of the bigger components, the amphitheaters and the big lawn, that seems better related to the programs happening inside Block A. We have the cycling club, that little track that now has better conditions actually after the relocation of the ramp on the upper left corner. And then of course there's more public oriented spaces near the corners of Bonnycastle Street and Queen's Quay, but also near Parliament, where you have the invitation into the community forest itself. There will also be sports amenities. We have placed the dog leash off area. I think COVID brought so many new dogs into cities globally, so that's something we have to consider. You have to, for instance, also consider not to put dog leash areas too close to playgrounds. That can sometimes be a conflict, but the point here is that we have tried to organize them spatially, both according to the flow that happens between the blocks and inside the courtyard, and the microclimate as well, that we will show you in a slide. Next, please. So here it is. We again have been through many meetings regarding the viability or the circumstances for the plantings. We have absolutely no worries about them internally. SLA is an interdisciplinary studio that also have biologists and planting experts, and we have also gained a lot of good advices from you and other local stakeholders in Toronto. But you can see here that there is a variation between the sun in the area, and obviously there is also an opportunity to get a lot of sun if you elevate yourself to the public accessible urban farm. That will be also an amenity for the area. And zooming out, you have an even bigger one, where we can also start to consider the conditions we have, but certainly also to give you a picture of whether this is a circumstance that is normal, considering the other developments along the harbor. It's true that buildings do cast shadows, and we will of course take the considerations and the details of this into the refinement of the programs in the next stages. But we still think that it's reasonable to have all of the amenities that we have implemented in the programs. And then again, also remember that some of these, even bright yellow one will be active, but it's still, and then there's also light reflection from the facades themselves that could also be accounted. So one thing is that if you then go to the next one, the connections in the eye height, in the human scale, are also essential of the experience of the community forest. And as you could hear from Ben and Camille was also talk about the timber building in more details after me, but that of course went through some iterations with the desire to create more retail and to ensure we have an active frontage along the urban spaces all around it. This corner here on Bonnycastle and Queen's Quay has always been an anchor point, something that we see as a big gesture, both as an invitation into the community forest, but also as a cool spot hanging out under the building. You are somehow protected for it, but it's still a generous protection in terms of the scale and height of that cantilever. You can see on the left side that this is where we will have some sort of water feature. You can also see it in the render. And even the direction of the pavers here is a consideration of flow, a design that literally invites people in to the community forest and bring you on a journey, a different journey than the other journeys that you can take along the waterfront. So there will be public spaces where you can sit, and there will also be some where you can pay to drink your coffee. And the same goes for the portal. Been through discussions about scale, height, and width. It's a very big open space that feels more like an urban space than an opening in a building, according to me at least. So this is really an invitation into the community forest again, but also where when you're standing in a community forest, you have a very important link back to the waterfront, which we are obviously part of. So here you can see that you have a scale here and a protection where you can really do programmable spaces. It's a benefit to have a covered space like that that still feels completely open. So we have many opportunities for event spaces and all kind of informal gatherings below that space. And you can see again, sorry, the last point, and then I will leave it over to Mel, is that notice that every corner and every side of the building has active retail frontage. Over to you, Kamal.
Thank you, Rasmus. Just continuing what Rasmus has just said, one of the key things here is, you can see from this image, we've created this alcove essentially as a means of connecting the Queen's Quay frontage back to the community forest. But this also provides a long-term, all-season public access space surrounded by our retail programming. Again, this also gives us the opportunity and continues the flow that we have with the building, where we try to break the facade up to allow it to be more inviting, provide that porosity back through to the community forest. Also, on the previous slide, one thing I just wanted to note that first portal does have a visual connection back down to the water through the T3 building to the south. Next slide. As mentioned by Ben earlier, we've gone through a few iterations of the timber house, particularly looking at the structural implications, the structural systems with the timber, availability of materials. And we're proposing, this is from 2023, with a building height of 39 feet plus a 5.5 meter bulkhead for services at the top of the building. But also, we're taking these into consideration, and we're proposing an increase to that height, which I'll show in the next slide. And here, we're asking to increase the building by a few meters to allow us that flexibility as we develop it, to provide us with more options for structural implementation. The key factor is that timber is very particular, and we just want to give ourselves the ability to be more flexible in the choices that we have available, as opposed to the previous height we felt made it those options a little bit more limited. Here on this image, touching back to what Rasmus mentioned earlier, we've made a few adjustments to the portals and cantilever sizes on the project. One, particularly to accommodate the need for the retail wall along Queen's Quay. We've increased that from, I believe we had about 70% coverage of retail and frontage to roughly just over 80%. By what we did is we adjusted, for example, portal 1, we've reduced it from a 24 meter portal to an 18 meter wide portal. but still maintaining that fabric that we've mentioned, that connection, that space for respite, that space for gathering, support for the retail, and also tying that retail back into the community forest, keeping the space active. We've added the second portal, which we now call the alcove. That one in particular, we've reduced it to a 9-meter opening, but now we've closed it off to allow us that ability and flexibility to have a space that's more protected for the seasons, but also there's opportunity to keep it fully open as we go through the design. We'll make that accommodation so that in the summertime, the warmer months, that could be still read as a full open portal. And with that, that brings additional opportunity for retail, particularly in that space, which we didn't have previously. The Western Cantilever, which is our gateway of Bonnie Castle and Quincy, as Rasmus mentioned, this is an important zone, and we've maintained that at its original size and height, particularly because it's that gateway from the west. Coupled with the to the east, we have the Pops area so we have these two main hubs bringing people into the site. Next slide. And just touching on the height increase. So just a diagram illustrating the difference from 2023 height option, the 39 feet overall building plus the bulkhead, to 44.34 meters. And what that allows us is an extra 0.35 meters per floor, which would allow us to have the ability to, if you can see for the two sections to the left, that extra space for potentially a timber drop beam that allows us a bit more flexibility for structural design. Previously, we were tied to set heights in terms of that structural makeup and a set type of construction. The new heights gives us a little bit more flexibility. I think in long term, what we're trying to do is also maintain a decent, clear height within the units to make them comfortable. And the other aspect too is at the retail level, we do gain some additional height to allow for more useful retail space to give us some more diverse options for potential retailers and partners. Next slide. So I'll pass it back on to Ben to continue through with the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kamal. And I'll move quickly because I imagine from a time check perspective, probably have to go. So just stepping now back, the kind of scale of the master plan. And one of the distinctive elements of Quayside is it shapes the skyline on the eastern waterfront. It's tall, and that's a result of a lot of the density being put into the towers themselves to allow for those really unique public realm moves at grade. And the intent is really to kind of create a signature on the skyline, not necessarily a height peak, but a pattern, an inverse peak, where the towers heights are more aligned with Parliament Street to the east, and then towards Sherburne Street in the west, creating that unique skyline experience. But then also at the base level, maintaining that kind of continuous, the continuous datum line of Queen's Quay and the consistent datum line that's established by buildings like the one we're in, and then a transition zone in between that. Just looking quickly at some of the views, and this came up in the last session, is what does that skyline look like from say the St. Lawrence neighborhood? Here we are on the Esplanade, looking east, and you can kind of see in darker blue the Quayside towers, and then some of the approved buildings in lighter blue, and showing that the kind of diversity of skyline experience from these perspectives, moving a little closer in, and again showing that distinctive skyline from St. Lawrence. Stepping back again, I mentioned the kind of different components of the building. an important element of the master plan was always, and obviously to maintain that consistent street wall height in the timber house along Queens Quay. You can see that reflected in some of the base building elements for, say, the curve building as well, kind of at the edges and bookending the blocks 1 through 4. In green is showed this transition zone where we have a different kind of form that emerges, particularly on the curve building with the transitioning building height that moves into the tower, but then also on the overstory where we have a different kind of approach, a bit more flexible approach to floor plates and then shifting into the tower zone itself in the blue. So a kind of a unique built form approach that will be explored further as the designs emerge. From a land use perspective, this just layers the kind of land use on it, including that active retail animating edge all along Queens Quay and wrapping up the into the community forest, but also up Parliament Street with the kind of more substantial retail spaces right at Parliament and the plaza spaces. The other non-residential uses, community spaces, and institutional spaces then go up into the base of the buildings, and then residential as is typical above that. The views have been very important considerations throughout the master plan. This just demonstrates those view corridors, including on Bonnycastle Street, the connection through the west portal to Aiken Place Park, the link from Small Street through to Merchants Wharf, and then obviously the big, more expansive Parliament view that opens up to Parliament Slip. And all of those have been aligned and carefully designed to provide for, to align in particular with the west portal to protect for those views. So this is from June, or from the original submission, and some of the view studies that we had undertaken to ensure that you could see the water and you can look out and see the lake, including in particular the streets, but also then through the portal itself in the community forest. And with the changes, we see kind of some subtle differences in how those views are framed, but still maintaining really those views so that there's still a kind of connection through, in particular through the west portal from a bigger part of the deeper part of that forest. And just for a scale comparison, that western portal, this demonstrates the kind of width of it. We're looking at Dockside Drive just to the west. It's kind of an 18-meter wide condition of building face to building face. It's that kind of scale. Or another example is the Queen Richmond Center, which I'm sure everyone's been in. And the scale of that space is equivalent to the nature of the scale of the west portal as one moves from Queens Quay into the community forest. Another question was on the sections through through from the water through into the distillery district and the communities to the north of the Gardner. And this demonstrates, this is a section through the portion of the site with the wider community forest. You can see the kind of scale of the space of the community forest equivalent to that of Queens Quay Boulevard. The width of that space. And the building heights themselves aligning with the T3 building, Nakaluna, which are in 49, 53 meters, and may actually be modeled a little short in this plan, but are actually at or above the height of proposed timber house. Looking at where the community forest comes a bit narrower, you can see the building heights are still aligned with the kind of lower scale condition towards the water. And the scale of the community forest basin is equivalent to that of, say, Edgewater Drive, and that scale of space. So how does that all get tied up? And this is the last section. I'll move on. We are now advancing zoning bylaws and going for approval that tries to tie up some of the important elements, the structuring elements of the master plan, but allowing flexibility for future design processes. So for those site plans to then evolve and emerge within an envelope that secures what's important, but gives flexibility to allow for what's important from a design perspective. And so the starting point is we've got kind of our base buildings and our setbacks to protect for the community forest, to protect for setbacks along Queens Quay, and to protect for links between the buildings through to the north and to Lakeshore Boulevard. Layering onto that, we have what I had described as those transition zones, where the base buildings transition up into the towers. They have varied floor plates. They transition in height from that kind of 40-meter-ish datum line up to 85 meters. But there's a minimum separation of 25 meters to allow for space and sky. The typical tower separation that's demonstrated there. And within that, we have the tower zones themselves, separated a minimum of 30 meters apart. But as I'll demonstrate in a moment, will actually deliver much greater setbacks. That's just the minimum established between the zones themselves. And that will see an average floor plate of 850 meters, and again, the 30-meter separation, and then a 5-meter setback from the base building, with the exception, sorry, of on Small Street where it's 3 meters. Then within that, we layer on in the zoning itself protection for things like pop spaces in green, connections into the pop spaces, public, secured public connections, and some of the kind of important elements like the cantilever in the portal area. As well as animation zones along Queens Quay to target the really high animation along and retail along that street. You can see this kind of fuzzy, odd-looking one demonstrating the zoning envelopes and how the towers fit within. So in many cases, the tower zone has a lot of room to move. That's allow for that design process to happen, but still protecting for minimum setback, minimum separation distances, step backs from the base, etc. And that's demonstrated here. The buildings themselves, as proposed, are in the dark blue, and those envelopes then are the pink that they're sitting with. And this is from the curve on the far left, extending all the way to far right. I get that right, to the far left here. And with on an exciting note of zoning, we will end the presentation. So thank you very much, and happy. I think the whole team is here to.
Thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. So we're probably in pretty good shape because we've had our tour already. So we'll have a little time. So let's go for a round of questions. And again, I don't have to remind anybody, but we're really dealing with zoning envelopes at this point. With the flexibility that we need in there. So if we could restrain our comments and any questions to the zoning envelope, I think that would be appreciated. So
ask a quick question.
Want to start?
Just more for Chris. Yes, we're have questions about the zoning envelope. However, the new portal plan was presented today. Are we going to have opportunity to comment on that and ask questions about that at the next meeting? And should we kind of like put that back of mind right now?
No, I think you can comment on the portals today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They don't really affect the zoning envelope. They're just more of a
No,
design.
I think actually they do, and I might ask Jed to just opine on that since Jed has been following this, or
Yeah,
or Michael, whichever one.
That would be
some
great.
of the dimensions of the portals are gonna be codified in the zoning bylaw to preserve the punctuation of the mass. So the degree to which you are able to comment, I think it would be appropriate to.
I might add, we will obviously be coming back to
Yeah,
as they get into design, so you will have more opportunities to comment on some of the specifics, but portals, I don't know, Chris, if you want to add something, but.
I can start with a question, Paul.
Yeah, cool. We're on the question. So go ahead, Betsy.
Regarding the portals and the doors on the street and the directive that we're thinking about fine-grained retail and connecting retail to the community, especially in the context of the development in the city that begins to kind of nullify doors on the street. And so there's so many examples in Toronto of a new building replacing, say, 16 doors on the street with a really small retail and stairs up to apartments with, say, 2 or 3 doors on the street to, which is one is likely an egress, maybe the entrance to the building, or 1 or 2 big box pieces. What was the conversation internally about connecting, eliminating the portal, which has 4 doors, in your rendering, the building to the west on Queens Quay has 3 doors on Queens Quay. What was the conversation kind of internally about engaging more fine-grained retail and connecting that to the community relative to fewer potentially doors that you're showing on the street, especially since, I mean, the portal I see is a very active space and I really like it and I'm really supportive of it. And now you've kind of eliminated one, so you've eliminated kind of a area of activation, and you're not showing that many spaces accessible by the community into the building. So I just want to know logics and what these conversations are and how that kind of applies to your zoning ask at this point.
I can take that one. So I think the important, a lot of internal discussions about this, I think is the short answer to your question, but there's always been this balancing of having retail space on Queens Quay and having openings in public realm on Queens Quay and creating that, finding the right balance of porosity into the community forest while having continuous a retail edge. And part of those opportunities for porosity then, as you've indicated, can break up the retail frontage in a way that allows for more doors. Maybe we provide a bit more clarity around the alcove in the intent there, because that actually it's intended to do both, and it's that balancing point where the filling in of that portal is meant to kind of still protect for pedestrian access, and you'll saw on the zoning map that there's a pedestrian access point through there, so it's a public connection through the building, but opportunity to be retailed. So think like a very brief section of mall, that's about the same width in terms of when you're walking through a typical indoor mall with kind of retail kiosks and that kind of an animation within it. So it's intended to find that right balance and offer those opportunities for actually more doors and more kind of a loose relationship between the retail and the public realm in a way that you can't have when you have just hard building edges, because you're inviting the public in. And so that's intended to kind of create and find that right balance around retail. But maybe Tony, I'll ask you to add on.
Yeah, maybe just to, if I understand the question correctly, I don't think today we're setting, where those doors are. So between the partnership Great Gulf and Dream, obviously we're operating the distillery. So we know how to do fine grain retail, and we'll definitely bring that experience here. Here, really, it's allowing us to, provide and increase that frontage, that desire to provide more frontage on Queens Quay. And the front door of these retailers will be on Queens Quay. And the piece that's facing the community forest right now, we're seeing that as more as a backyard or kind of Main Street retail, where that allows you to have terraces and other opportunities that are a bit different than what's happening on Queens Quay. So it's not meant to suggest we're reducing the number of doors. We didn't count the number of doors that were in the first submission versus this one. That obviously is something that we'll work through as part of the design process. And the alcove is really just trying to avoid some of the other spaces that we've seen along the waterfront, which from our perspective perhaps have been a little bit less successful, including Aqualuna here, where there's a big distinction between the actual retail units and the public aspect of it. So number 5, really, the idea here is to come up with a blend of the two so that you can get both the best worlds and also just have a space that is a bit different than the cantilever, number 3, in the community forest, and just adding to the offering rather than taking away.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So understanding how wide and busy a street Queens Quay will be, is there opportunity, say, if for these kind of front yard patios as opposed to the backyard patios to be on Queens Quay as well?
There's, I believe it's a 3-meter setback on Queens Quay to allow for that.
Okay,
yeah.
So that will be included in the zoning so that they won't have, a restaurant won't have to go back to the city and say, I want a patio. Yeah. Please let me have one. It's already baked in.
The 3-meter setback baked in.
And also that's one of the advantages of the alcove, where it does present that setback of that entry door to it, where it gives additional space for outdoor spaces for the retail support. That support also happens within the west portal. that's an aspect that we did cover, and one of the key things for it and key usages.
Even in the block, the pop space is set back from the building to allow for that kind of animation, not interfering with the public access to the block.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. I'm gonna go back and forth with our guests online. Pina, do you have any questions?
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for that comprehensive presentation. I'm actually energized by just the ambitions, I think, of this this whole undertaking. I have maybe Betsy asked a few of some of the questions I had. I think there are for me a lot of questions, zoning questions around Timber House, because it really does have that heavy responsibility, I think, to not only create that porosity, which I think you're doing very well from a built form point of view to the waterfront, but also the kind of interface and stitching of all of the nature of the community forest behind it, all of the lobbies and podiums of the other buildings. And I know we tend to, especially as architects, concentrate on Timber House, but I also think because it is so interesting and a take on, I'm excited by the idea of having something really simple do pretty complex things. But I think that there's a lot of things still to consider in terms of even, again, like disciplining myself to sticking to the zoning envelope. One sort of basic question is, how do you get the public up to the public urban farm? So I thought when I first saw the plan, I thought that the alcove was mislabeled as retail. I thought that's what was the kind of public entry to the elevated public farm on the roof.
I can
You want to take that, Tony?
Yeah, so we've been working with Brooklyn Grange in New York, as well as having visited TMU Urban Farm. So we're learning about how urban agriculture works on a rooftop space, and understanding best practices, what works and what doesn't work. So high level, we are protecting for a number of things. I can't say that we've gone down a detailed design process. That's yet to come as part of our design process.
Yeah, sorry,
So-
I wasn't asking about the farm. I'll leave that to my colleagues to ask those questions. I just the basic question of, how does the public get up there?
Yeah, so, sorry, that was a bit of a preamble to that, so I'll get right to it,
Okay,
Pina.
sorry.
So the mass timber building is very long. As envisioned right now, it's 4 different buildings. It's part market, part affordable rental housing. So there's a bit of a phasing consideration here. So as part of the first phase, there will be a service elevator in what we call 1C1, which is on the west side there. That will double as both public access and service access to the rooftop. So that will be the main way that visitors access the urban farm in the early phases. Once it's fully built out, the front door will become located on 3B2, which is right next to Parliament Slip. And that's where we envision having more event type spaces that also will be the hub for programs for people to visit, for educational things as well as visitors. So day one, it's going to be a 1C1, and in the future, it will be part of 3B2 next to Parliament Slip, which will obviously enjoy all those views over Parliament Slip and Silos.
Okay, Tina?
So, yeah, no, I have 2 more questions. One is the 3-meter setback on Queens Quay. It actually is in some ways still relying on added awnings, I would think. Like, there isn't any additional setback at what you're calling the retail sort of animated facade. Is that Like, should we take this at face value so that there's sometimes I see little dotted lines and they seem to imply that there will be awnings there. Is that right?
Kamal can speak to this too, but I think the intent is to protect for that kind of space, to protect for space both at grade for awnings, for patios, and then above grade for balconies. So there's a buffer built into that setback to protect for that space. Is that the question?
Yeah, like there's no recess is what I'm saying to account for to that sort of brow, you know, south-facing sun and that pedestrian experience. There will be just kind of assumed add-on awnings rather than recessed storefronts.
Correct. That would be something we would look at once we get into further discussions with the retail experts and what's needed. But that buffer does allow that. Also above for the units, we do have a projection of balconies that helps with the variation on the facade to give it some dynamism as we go through.
And so in the section, I know, you know, the increased height of the building to account for that timber structure. Really, there's no increase in the height of the retail. It's still 2.45 meters. Is that right? So from the 2023 version, there is an increased height. Maybe there's more space for signage now, but actually the ceiling height hasn't changed. Is that correct?
To a certain degree, there is an increase in height that allows a little buffer for mechanical space that will in turn reduce the impact. So if you see that bulkhead.
Right. So in this section, it shows it's exactly like the height of the actual retail space is the same, 2.45 meters.
Sorry, Tina, this is a typical residential floor. The retail floor we don't actually show in the blown up section, but you can see in the bottom right corner.
Oh, I see. It's 5.5.
It's increased, yes.
Increased to 5.5. Okay. My last question is really whether there was any kind of wind modeling done. Not necessarily. I mean, I know we concentrate on wind modeling for the elevated podium levels, but at grade, especially at the Bonnycastle, the West Cantilever, and that whole entry into the community forest. Was there any wind modeling done there?
Maybe I'll answer that quickly, Paul. Yes, there's wind modeling done. We are actually anticipating our draft results on Friday. It's all kind of ramping up quickly to understand that, but we've been looking at it on an iterative basis. Basically, the entire southern portion of Quayside, including the community forest, including the portals, the Queens Quay frontage, has good wind conditions. There's certain points where at the north side near Lakeshore, where wind kind of comes around buildings, that we're making adjustments there to get to good to better wind levels. But the community forest is very much protected, and the Queens Quay frontage, the portals, the cantilevers all have really positive wind conditions. So the wind is good where we really want it to be good.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Let's keep going on questions. Got to watch our time here. Janet, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for a really great presentation. It's really good to see how much it's improved. I just have two quick questions. The first is the shadow studies that you've incorporated. Do they show the increased height to the AJ building, or is it the old height? That's a new height. So on slide 26 with the shadow diagrams, it seems that the area north of the AJ building is getting about on average 1 to 2 hours of sun a day. I don't know when this is taken, but June. So a kind of critical month for planting and for a forest. So I'm wondering whether Rasmus said that there's an ongoing conversation between the biologists at the farm all feeding into tweaking the urban forest and the landscape space. It's related to zoning because it's about zoning heights. I'm curious has there been discussion about this to date that has validated that you can go up that high and still have a successful public realm?
Rasmus?
Yes, I'm here.
Right.
So, yeah, so, I mean, the dream scenario for me is that there was no buildings and I could do a big park because I'm a landscape architect by heart. So if you ask if the condition would be better without buildings, the answer is yes. But since we are planning and designing things here within buildings, we have to find solutions within those circumstances. And yes, we have considered that, and we have considered, we studied previous projects, but we have also used examples of, among others, a hospital. We have a similar climate in Denmark, where we have the same amount of sun condition in a much narrower courtyard, where we also accomplished a very lush planting. So we have considered that in all of the decisions. So yes, I would say so. But yes, I mean, the optimal condition would be more sun for the trees and for the people, but it will still feel and be a success as a lush forest.
Okay. Thank you. Go back to our guest, Nina Marie. Do you have any questions? Oh, you're muted.
I think you're muted, Nina.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes.
It's not showing on my end. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for a comprehensive presentation. Like my colleagues, I'm also really excited by the diversity and richness of this program, and very excited to see how it will land. In the context of the zoning envelope, and just full disclosure, I'm a planner, I understand something about zoning, but I'm struggling a little bit, given that my comments will pertain specifically to the community forest in this context and the urban farm as aspect of the public realm. And I'm just trying to understand exactly how they will work within this prospective zoning. And I need a little bit more information, I think, to be helpful. Specifically, and again, I know we've heard a little bit of this before, but the refinements here make me ask this question especially. And following on both Pina's and Betsy's comments, first, if the access to the urban farm is intended, unlike the TMU urban farm on which I work, this is public access or intended to be full public access, or how is that imagined?
Sorry to ask, you said community forest, right?
The first question is about, I apologize if there's a lag. There's two questions I have. One is about the working process of both the urban farm and the community forest as aspects of the public realm within the context of the zoning envelope. So the first question is just if you could explain to me a little bit about how we envision the urban farm to function. Is it fully publicly accessible on build out? Is that the ambition, unlike the TMU urban farm, for example?
I think the short answer would be no, that it wouldn't be fully accessible, everyone kind of walking around freely within the urban farm, but that access would be controlled in certain ways and still to be determined. But access would be limited to potentially certain areas, and then other access more broadly, like with TMU, through say tours or something to the full farm, but in a controlled manner.
Okay, so this is it's not truly a public realm. It's a special event space or a tour space or whatever. But is it also, excuse me, is it also intended to be producing commercial food for commercial use? that is sold in a community. The questions are related to the zoning envelope insofar as I'm trying to understand the servicing and flow between that roof farm and at grade. In the same way I might ask those questions about a lay-by or an entry for deliveries. I'm just trying to understand how this will function.
That's a really good question, and I think it's kind of tied to what Tony mentioned. Is there's elements of the design process that still have to be worked out, including things like, how do you get the products from the roof down to grade? It's different. You don't put that in the residential elevator, and it's in the same way. There's considerations for, say, having continued access for farm equipment and materials, which introduces the concept of the bridge across Small Street, that is probably designed to accommodate a small lawn tractor so that it can do the farming, participate in farming. That level of detail hasn't been resolved for the rezoning submission. But the kind of servicing considerations have been tested, including kind of access low grade for smaller vehicles that can come right up to the core of the timber house building and provide opportunities to kind of bring produce, etc. So that's factored in at a zoning level, but definitely the full logistics of how the farm will operate, including the question of public access, still have yet to be worked out.
Okay, I do understand that, and I appreciate that this is all a moving series of targets. I'm just thinking about how we typically think about a zoning envelope for a typical building. This is not in that respect, and so I think I can come back to that in comments, but it's, I think, an important question specifically around servicing and the type of services that would be needed, irrespective of whether or not this is partially or fully public. The same question a little bit around the community forest. Could you say a little bit more about how you specifically, what you know so far, how you envision this as a POPs, but still a community forest, that is going to, unlike zoning, will be dynamic and will change, will need maintenance, and of course, some question about how it might work. Silvacells, mycorrhizal conduits in a new community forest tradition, or planters within that zoning envelope. Again, I'm trying to get an idea of how much will it push against that? How much will it want to spill over? Or does it need a different way of thinking about the zoning envelope, particularly at the public realm in the perimeter? Again, not a very specific question, but just helping me to understand how this rubs up against what you're proposing for zoning.
So I think, I mean, at its kind of most elemental level, the zoning envelope keeps buildings out of there. And in addition to that, the layering on of the POPs, there is a POPs layer in the zoning bylaw itself that protects for that space for public access, but that's about easements and legalities of public access, not so much how the space is built and programmed. I think the questions about a planting strategy, Rasmus will talk to you for hours in terms of the overall approach to that. And there's a lot of questions have been raised on that. That will Rasmus's team has tested it and confirmed it, but we'll be getting into the detailed nuances of that as we as the site plan emerges for that master site plan that includes the ground. But yeah, from the zoning perspective, we're actually fairly light on the kind of any kind of intention for that, aside from protecting it as open and POPs and publicly accessible.
Okay, so if from a zoning, last question, from a zoning point of view, and I thank you for your patience with my meandering question, from a servicing point of view, if this forest is not using mycorrhizal conduits, for example, or a fundamentally different kind of forest supportive structure that requires wider access for vehicles, for machinery, then we just assume that it's treated like any other POPs. Is that fair to say? I'd have to rely on Rasmus to answer that question. I have a
science degree, but it's been 25 years since.
What was the question again? Can you, sorry, Nina, can you repeat?
I'm sorry if I'm belaboring it. I'm just really trying to understand, reconcile the very progressive idea of an intense community forest. And I'm asking a question about how are you planning to use silvicells, mycorrhizal conduits, for example, the understructure that might require greater access widths than a traditional POPs. Does that fit within the traditional POPs and zoning that is shown here? I'm just not understanding how it would work. What is the understructure of this community forest?
So the understructure is predominantly soil, lightweight soil structure. We are considering having some soil blocks under some of the pathways, basically trying to ensure that we have the biggest amount of connected growth volume as possible. We even had an option where all of the paths has a carrying layer of the soil block. We haven't decided what type yet in this level, but I would say and I think it's only wonderful to care about that community forest. And so I get the question. I would say the fight we are having right now, it's not a fight, the dialogue we are having right now is to ensure enough soil for the trees to have the wide. So, and that's what we have accomplished from day one. So that's what I can assure you, that all of the trees has the 30 cubic meters or whatever the regulation is. So there is enough soil, and then we will try to have a maintenance, a nature-based design manual that we also normally do. And then there is nothing that can be accessed more than and if there's there's fire access zone, that's where the things can happen for the maintenance. So yes, I think we are in a good condition in relation to the maintenance as well at this level.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
Well, thanks. I just asked to remind people to speak up because people in the back are a hard time to hear. And the second thing is if we could keep our questions and comments shorter. We have half an hour left for all questions and comments. Obviously, we're not going to make it. So if you could really try and keep it to the zoning envelope. Emily, please. Any questions?
Peter asked my question about the wind study. I'm set.
No questions. All right. Let's go back. Fadi, any questions?
Yeah, just one very quick comment. Is there any public access to the buildings on the north side in Block 1A and Block 1B from the community forest? I know that there's some amenity space, but can the public access any of those buildings at the ground floor, or are they purely for residents?
Yeah, you can see a diversity of programming reflected here in the ground floor. And some of, I just use 1B as an example. There's a series of, conceptual entry points, doorways into the community forest that would provide access into the community hub, which would include access to the daycare that's proposed for in the upper levels at the base of that building. So that would have uses. The actual details of the program of that space are to be determined, but would be a publicly accessible community hub type of space.
So the amenities, not condo amenities per se, it's public access.
That in the blue, yes. In the darker yellow, that's representing again conceptually condo amenity. So likely not with doorways, but some aspects of the lobbies themselves can have entrances on from the community forest. The lighter yellow color.
Okay, thanks.
No, I think it's just quickly, it's a good point, and the flow in the community forest is also aligned with that access to the community hub and the academic institution. So it's a good point.
Back to the panel. David, any questions?
Just a quick one. And I'm looking at Block 1B, and I'm looking at the zoning map, the combined zoning map. Noticing that your there's the setback between the timber building and Block 1B is 15 meters, as is 1C, I believe. I'm just wondering, is the rationale for making it the same as the block adjacent to the east? Are you looking for flexibility in terms of the types of uses that might be at ground floor, like potentially private spaces around those buildings as opposed to protecting for the public, a larger public realm. It looks on the demonstration plan as if the public realm is kind of deeper in that cross section.
Yeah, I think the intent is I think to allow for some flexibility to kind of figure out exactly what kind of public realm programming is within these links. But also then to say, we're kind of working at cross purposes in that we don't want really wide openings to the Gardner and Lakeshore because it takes away that protective element of the community forest. So that's the kind of balancing act. Obviously, between 1A and 1B, we've got a pickup and drop off area that's extended into the buildings as well, underneath the buildings. But on between 1B and 2, there's a bit more of a uncertainty in terms of what exactly will land there once we get into the detailed aspects of programming. Like, for example, the exhaust area is sitting there right now and how that integrates. So the intention is just, protect for a good enough amount of space of 15 meters that allows for opportunities for programming and for PUDO that may expand or contract depending on the nature of uses. Block 2 is actually kind of constrained because there's a whole TTC substation requirement there. So there's a bit of a uncertainty around how much footprint they will need within the building, but it's intended to find that balance of kind of open but not too open.
Thank you, Gina. Any questions?
No.
No questions? Okay. Kevin?
No, all my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Wonderful. Oh my God, we're going to move to comments. Okay, we're on to comments. Try and keep them focused to the zoning envelope. And Betsy, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. I think my question really showed you the focus of my concerns for the project relative to engagement on Queens Quay. So I don't have any further comments besides my question.
Okay, thank you. Pina, any comments? Oh, you're muted. Can't hear.
I'm so sorry. I just wanted to continue Betsy's comment to say now's the time to really set in the zoning envelope what I would call the retail and animation rationale. I think it's just leaving too much to what happens later. I think that there's such a smart built-in flexibility in this whole project. I think there's a spirit of built-in flexibility, meaning setting us up for success, no matter which tenant or new owner or all of that comes in. That's the ambition. There needs to be a lot more control, I think. First of all, what defines retail? I think it's not enough to shade it pink and put the word retail there. And so I do think that the facade at grade, test out if there is a kind of faith in having awnings, for example, and that goes for the grade related engagement of the community forest with the other buildings. The difference between the community forest side and the Queens Quay side of Timber House. I would also just add that the base of is it building B, block B, where there's the big gray loading area. That needs that extra space, the clearing, but I think the residential lobby, the rest of the building at grade should pinch that at the community forest so that we're not, subject to this really leaky kind of service space. That's a small refinement, but again, now's the time. And I think that there needs to be a touchdown from that urban farm at grade.
Okay, thank you. Actually, it's a good time for me to make one comment that it's on the retail strategy related to Betsy's question. One of the things I recall when I was at the city is this is supposed to be a neighborhood retail environment. And as we all know, Queens Quay is not the most wonderful retail street. It's got pockets, it's got big gaps. And when I walked here this morning from Bay Street over here, what you see is at grade big bank buildings. There is no fine grain anything. It's somewhat to the west, but this is an opportunity I don't want to see missed. So one of the things I recall, and I think it would be very useful to put in the zoning envelope, a requirement that says a certain percentage of the retail shops fronting on Queens Quay should have a maximum store width of no more than 25 or 30 feet. And I've done that before in the zoning bylaw, many moons ago with Jane Jacobs, ironically. And I think something like that should be written into the zoning bylaw. And I'll just throw out a number and we can discuss it. It could be 50% of the retail frontage has to be no more than a maximum bay width of 25 or 30 feet, or it could be 2/3, or it could be 75%. I'll leave that open, but I just want to put that concept on the table. That's what should go in zoning. Otherwise, you could end up with just big, huge floor plates and no fine grain retail. So I just want to make that comment at this point in time. Okay, let's go back to the panel. Who wants to go next? Gina, you want to pick up on that?
I'm going to build on that. I think the ambition of this project is really incredible and really beautifully presented. So thank you. I just want to reinforce what Betsy and Paul have said. I'm trying to imagine myself as a user and walking through here, and I think there's a sense of the forest and the building as a place of great discovery and kind of wander, and I think that's really beautiful. But I also think it could start to feel, and it's exactly to the point of other buildings that we know around in this media context, just a bit disorienting and relentless. And so everything you can do, and I love Paul's suggestion of the ground floor having, some commitment to small scale retail, anything that can be done to increase the amount of openings and doors, anything you can do to increase the amount of presence of different scales and types of retail, and anything you can do to really think about the design of the ground floor and those portals from a wayfinding and first-time user perspective, because I think we can talk ourselves into and see the diagrams and understand it as designers, but all these questions that are being asked about how the farm works and how you get in and out of the building will be really disorienting to users and really hard to read. So I would just find ways to make that more legible at the ground floor through design, but also through signage and wayfinding and through design of the public realm and through the retail position. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's go back to our guest, Nina Marie. Any comments?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to ask those questions. My questions are probably indicative of my comments, really. Zoning is fixed, forest or not. I really appreciate that this is moving us forward, and thank you very much for the work that you're doing. Pina's comments really, I think, emphasize the need to set us up for success. And if there's a way to work with city partners to think about the zoning bylaw here to protect that essential flexibility wherever possible for servicing, for access, and the tensions between those, especially for the types of uses that are very progressive here around not just planter boxes, but a forest, a farm, not just a green roof. Those are very different uses. And I think the zoning has to, in whatever way possible, embed that flexibility in the same way that you're talking about for animation of the public realm and the fine-grained quality that's so essential to the success of this building. Anything that we can do, including with city partners, I would be very supportive of. So that's my comments for now. Thank you.
Okay, back, David.
I think okay, good, fair enough. Thanks very much for the presentation, and I'm going to stick to the zoning aspect of the project. I guess in my mind there are a few tensions here, and I'm just thinking about it through that kind of zoning perspective. One is I think the ambition to close off along the north edge, to close off the development and use that built form to create a really strong edge for the urban forest, so that it doesn't kind of, as was mentioned earlier, kind of leak into the Gardner and Lakeshore experience. although there is a kind of ambition, I think, to make visual connections at some point to the St. Lawrence neighborhood to the north, but I think that's pretty tangential in my mind. So I think and I think the zoning, as it's been set up, the blocks as I'm looking at, for example, the combined map, does take that into account in terms of really shrinking those passageways as much as possible, despite the fact that there is the drop-off area between 1A and 1B that seems to be kind of opening up. But I'm hoping that ultimately those can really be narrowed down as much as possible to ensure that that urban forest doesn't feel like it's kind of leaking out, and the views and that experience are kind of drawing on negative aspects of the garden area adjacent. I think there's another tension in terms of the porosity of Queens Quay Boulevard, obviously, and the urban forest. And I think you've come to a really nice balance in my mind, striking the balance with the activity of Queens Quay and that kind of retail, fine grain retail, as well as the scale of those portals. I think they're successful in terms and noting the one to the west also is, I think that could be quite a gracious entrance to the urban forest. And then finally, I guess my only kind of slight concern is that with the configuration of the pops in the diagram that I'm looking at, that kind of 15-meter zone that extends from the larger urban forest to the east doesn't feel like it would in any way be sufficient to be able to conceive of an urban forest in that section of the plan. However, when I look at the master plan and knowing the design team here, I think that the ambition will be achieved as long as the zoning diagram is not ultimately followed from that implementation perspective. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Fatty, any comments?
Yeah, really quick. Thank you so much. I mean, I think some of the most vibrant, successful urban spaces in cities is where zoning is not overly prescriptive. You know, think of Kensington Market, for example, where the front and back of houses begin to disappear, and the grain of the urban fabric is thought of more as a continuous whole versus fragmented objects sitting on a field. So I'm very glad to hear also someone mention the distillery, because I think that's another great example where the individual structures kind of disappear and the entire groundscape becomes this animated, exciting place to be. So I'm really excited to hear that the team is aiming for something like that. And I think it's beginning to appear more in the timber houses than on the north side. So I just want to encourage the team to think a bit more radically about ground floor retail use as, radical mixed use, if you will. I live in a building that has a YMCA in it, a food hall, a youth shelter, retail, restaurants, and residential all on one block. So I just want to encourage the team to also think a bit more creatively on that north end of the site, where you can start to push for a bit more radical mixed use and mixes of activities that might just currently seem incongruent, but be more adjacent. And one other quick comment, I'm really excited to see that there's a lot of microclimate and sun and shade studies that were presented in the package. It would have been really fantastic if there's just one diagram that plans one-to-one the massing diagram and the sunshade with what you imagine the public realm to be, right? So if we're saying we're leading with landscape and we want to future-proof this public space in the middle and make sure it's successful, then the correlation between the zoning massing and the public realm's success, even if it's still very preliminary, would be really an innovative push, right? We don't often see zoning land use plans with planting plans at the ground plane. So I think this is the opportunity that this project presents, both from a planting palette where you can push and pull the massing to ensure the mutual success of both the community forest and the building envelopes, as well as all these other kind of critical servicing and amenity requirements that come with ensuring its success. So I think all those ingredients are there. I think the clarity between the innovation and the zoning envelope and the notion that there's a successful public realm and a community forest being generated is an exciting opportunity and a diagram that I would love to see. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Fatty. Emily, comments?
Sure. So I'm really excited about the way that the public realm has been described, and in terms of the zoning, the fact that the hops has really been kind of solidified, so that there is that kind of that realm has been delineated, and the buildings won't be encroaching as much. So at least there's the line has been marked down on the ground there. What I'm still questioning a little bit is the sunshade diagrams that I saw. I'm happy to hear that the wind was done, and it would have been great to see those diagrams, and trust that what you all said is true, that the comfort level is there. In terms of the sunshade diagrams, just showing it in June, I understand that's for comfort, that's great, but I think that we need to see it in April and September, specifically for April, when the growing seasons actually start, and to really understand the hours at that time. It's super important to know that, so that we can understand the kind of gradation that's going to happen within the community forest, because the Carolinian forest that's being proposed here, which is really exciting. I think that we talked about this last time. There's going to have to be consideration of that gradation, and the kind of north side of the okay, the name of this.
No, it's clear. We need to have all of the seasons and the wind as a total investigation. We have done slightly of it. We haven't had all of the details, and so if I can just allow myself to say that, it's a good comment, and we will follow up on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Janet, you had a chance?
Sure.
Yep.
Thank you. And I just want to echo my colleagues' appreciation for the improvements, particularly in my case. I'm really happy to see that the ramp is off Bonnycastle. I think that makes a huge, the knock-on effect for the public realm at that west side is just huge from that one move. So thank you for that. Just going to follow up on Fadi and Emily's comments. I really want this to succeed. I think the ambitions for a landscape-led development of this nature is so exciting. And so when I see in the zoning envelope that the AJ building actually can go up even higher in height as part of the zoning envelope is concerning to me. That building blocks the south, a lot of the west, and a lot of the east light. So I feel like allowing that to go higher than it already is, which is higher than it was a year ago, would be problematic unless you can come back, to Emily's point, with real data the next time that convinces us that this strategy will work. All we want is for this to work really well. It's not only just the community forest, but there's an overarching ambition here to have a vertical forest. And that won't work if it doesn't get enough light either. So I think there's an instrumentality to the AJ building that's being overlooked at the moment. So I would say lowering the allowable building envelope on the AJ building at this point to really shrink wrap the height at its current proposal might be a really intelligent thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's everyone. No, Kevin, sorry.
Thanks very much, Paul. I think I just want to reiterate support for the project. It's really very, very exciting. Can't really reiterate any better the comments that have already been made vis-a-vis retail. Ultra important. You know, the timber house. So I just have to sort of talk a little bit about my excitement about the timber house. Kind of an amazing kind of new, really typology for Toronto, but it's still a big building, still a tall building. And for me, maybe this is a bit futile, but the portals for me have to be really, really big. So I realize there's a tension with getting the density in there, but I just think, you know, drawing the public into that center block is really, those portals make a lot of sense, but they have to be really, really big. So, but you know, how you kind of build that into the zoning is you know, again, I agree with Fatty. We shouldn't be too restrictive given the design team here. But so that's my comment. Thanks.
Okay, sorry, we're just having a very secretive
Yes,
conference
yeah.
here. Anyway, okay, I think we've got all the comments in, so I'll do my best to summarize. First of all, thanks for a very comprehensive presentation. Again, I think you've heard general, very positive support for the master plan and all the components, and we understand the complexities of trying to get into detail when really we're supposed to be just talking about the zoning envelopes. And so we've tried to mix both, I think. So I would say generally there's overall support for the flexibility that is built into this as you get to the design stage with some of the extra height that's shown, especially also the increased height in the ground floor retail. I'm going to focus my comments generally a whole series of comments on the retail strategy or retail animation, and secondly on the community forest. There's many other specifics, but I'll start with the retail strategy. And I think, first of all, everybody wants this to be drop dead gorgeous, this totally successful in every possible way. And you've heard many of us express our concern about the lack of retail continuity and retail animation on Queens Quay. And especially since this is on the north side of Queens Quay, be facing south, there's huge opportunities for a very vibrant little retail village along that portion of Queens Quay. And many people have said that, of course, this should have neighborhood uses, not just big box blank facades. So with that in mind, there have been several suggestions, and I'm going to put one forward here, that you explore all possible ways in the zoning envelope to maximize these small bay widths of retail shops on the north side of Queens Quay. And in my commentary, I suggested that a certain percentage of those shops should have bay widths no wider than 25 or 30 feet. There's flexibility in there. And frankly, if we're serious about a retail continuity and a retail village, I would suggest 75% of that frontage should be comprised of those bay widths of 25 to 30 feet. So I'll put that out there as part of the retail strategy. Second is in terms of the overall nature of the uses that go in there. I know we can't specify that in zoning, obviously, but I think the general feeling of the panel is you want to have some local retail uses in there to serve that community, and every effort should be made when you get further down the road in terms of the retail strategy to cater to what was called the radical mixed use, and I couldn't agree more on that. So various suggestions on the retail component. With respect to the community forest, everybody wants it to succeed, loves the idea, loves the concept. Several suggestions made about some concern. Well, generally the higher heights and the flexibility are okay. There's some concern about further testing needed on the sun and the shade conditions in spring and fall for obvious reasons in terms of to maximize growth of the plant material in the community forest. And one suggestion is made for consideration of lowering the height somewhat on the AJ building to perhaps increase those kinds of conditions to improve the opportunities for the community forest. I know you've done the wind studies. We haven't seen them yet. They'll come later. People support moving the access ramp away from Bonnie Castle. Another suggestion made about perhaps narrowing the entrances to the north, so towards the Gardner and the lakeshore, so that the community forest doesn't spill out onto what are obviously very, very busy roads that really, really intensify that experience of the community forest. Several other very specific comments were made, but I think I know we're going to have an opportunity to see this in greater detail as it comes forward. So I
Are
think.
you able to speak up a little? Some people can't hear you in the back.
Oh.
Can you shout a little more?
My apologies. I'm not going to repeat all that. So basically, I talked about the retail strategy and the community forest, and I think those comments are recorded. With respect to specific details, one other comment that was made, I want to make mention of looking at we were encouraged looking at the distillery as sort of a model for the ground floor retail fine grain mix. And I think that's certainly in the right direction. One other suggestion made for consideration was consider looking at how would access be provided, perhaps from grade and access facility up to the urban farm. I know it's not to be totally public, but there's a suggestion I thought that it would be accessible to the public, perhaps at certain locations. So I think that needs to be, excuse me, built in. So in summary, I think we're very supportive. We're positive. We want to see this. We want to do everything we can to help advance this strategy, and look forward to seeing it come back in greater detail. So with that in mind,
Paul, can you just repeat what you said about the AJ building? I'm not sure I even followed you.
there was a suggestion in the further testing of the sun and shade. We've only seen the June sun and shade studies so far, and there was a concern that if still doesn't provide the kind of light that we think might be needed to maximize the growth of the community forest, we'd like to see the spring and fall sun and shade diagrams. And one suggestion was made to help with that situation, possible lowering of the height of AJ building. That was the nature of the comment. I believe, Jana, that was yours, so I want to make sure I've got that correct.
So I just wanted to clarify that we're not saying reduce the zoning envelope necessarily, but because we can still lower the building within the zoning envelope.
Yes, but not make it higher than it's.
Yeah, not make it higher than
That's
already.
right.
Don't go higher. So maximize the light.
Then we're seeing.
Yeah, okay.
Correct.
Okay. So I hope that captures the general range of comments, and we'll look forward to seeing it back in the future. So we need to just take a vote, and I would think we would have a vote of support for this at its stage now, and welcome the details coming back in the future. I wish you all well with this. We want to make sure that this is just one of the best possible examples that will blow Torontonians away. So thank you. So we give you an opportunity, I guess, at the end to just make any comments you want, or in terms of what you heard from the panel here this morning. Would you want to speak in behalf?
I don't know, Patty, do you want to add anything else? No, I think just on behalf of the partnership, we really appreciate the input that you guys provided today. Obviously, we're going to take everything seriously in consideration, and we will develop the scheme further along the way to address some of the comments that you guys already made. But we very appreciate in terms of the opportunity that you guys provided to us, and looking forward to work with you guys again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good luck. Well, it's 10 after 12. Apparently, we're getting a lunch, and there it is. We are good until 12:45.
We don't vote anymore?
I will leave for dinner. Take care, everyone.
Did we not vote?
I thought we just voted.
Oh, okay.
Nobody.
Oh, okay.
So I assume we're all in favor. Yes, I'm sorry for
Kind of like a
clarifying
no.
that. Silence is golden.
Yeah, I just voted.
Okay, we'll break for lunch till 12:45. 12:45, let's reconvene. Parliament slip activation, only issues ID, so no vote on this. And you have the pleasure of introduce yourself first.
Yes, hi everyone. I am Margot Shafrin. I am one of the design project managers at Waterfront Toronto. And today we will be resharing the Parliament Slip activation project for Issues ID, which was already brought to the Waterfront DRP in April 2022.
Yeah, so we're redoing Issues ID because you guys told us to change everything. So
Next slide.
somebody's listening. Actually, it was all Jeff, who's not even here anymore.
Next slide.
Leon, you're running the slides.
Next slide.
Yes, I am.
please.
Sorry, I did not hear you. Sorry.
No problem. So
At that time, the project received some very thoughtful and constructive feedback that we since incorporated into a revised vision of the project, which we will share with you today. The extensive consultant team is led by West 8 and DTAH, who will be doing most of the talking. But before we jump into that, I'm going to provide a brief reintroduction to the context and share some of the feedback that we've heard to date. Next. The project is situated at the foot of Parliament Street at the edge of Lake Ontario and will eventually join a suite of waterfront parks that connect the city to Lake Ontario. Next. And this project, and we envision this project as an anchor point for the developing waterfront community nestled between East Bayfront to the west, Quayside wrapping around the north and the east side of the slip, and then the Keating district just a little further east. In addition, go back one slide. Thanks. In addition, there's going to be a pedestrian bridge that connects the slip across southward of the Keating Channel to a new park at the northwest corner of Villiers Island. Next. Just as a reminder, I think everybody should understand this by now, but in order to unlock lands for Quayside and to extend Queens Quay East further east, we need to do some lake infill of the slip in order to unlock those lands. And so at this point, that dock wall has been solidified and its location is now reflected in all of our drawings. As you can see in this diagram or this drawing on the left-hand side of the screen. Next slide. So mobilization began earlier in 2023. We expect construction to last for 12 more months. Contractors are out on site. You can see the turbidity curtains have been installed on the right-hand side of this image in the water. You can also see staging for the dock wall panels up in this corner. And they've also started to begin installing the dock wall. They're working from the west eastward. So it's all starting to take shape. This image is just from yesterday. Next slide. So ultimately, we see Parliament Slip as a local amenity and a crux of the East Waterfront neighborhood, and being a magnet that draws visitors from within the larger metropolitan city, as well as being an amenity to the local community, fostering a community supported by local recreation and amenities. Next slide. Which is especially in complement to the community center that's going to be located at the ground floor of Aqua Luna, which is just on the west side of the slip. So in this plan, York is up, the slip is here, and then this is the community center. So it's all going to be facing the slip. What's not seen here is on the other side of Parliament Slip is Silo Park. So Parliament Slip will be that connector between these two community facilities. Okay, next slide. Thank you. At the heart of the Parliament Slip project is an outdoor extended season pool. And so in conceptualizing this pool, we've looked towards other waterfront cities globally that have popular pool waterside facilities, including examples like the Kitsilano pool in Vancouver, as well as the harbor baths in Aarhus, Denmark. Okay, so this is the key plan that we showed you back in April 2022. It highlights the 5 major programmatic elements of the project. So the first are the harbor pools, which we envision as outdoor extended season swimming pools. Second, a wave deck to accompany the suite of wave decks that already exist along the waterfront. Thirdly, a canoe and kayak launch within this, which in this diagram are paired with the wave decks, so number 2. But those are envisioned as not a non-motorized vehicle launch for outdoor recreation directly connected with the lake. Third is a fixed transportation pier then fourth, a floating pier with food stalls and retail concessions. One evolution of the project is that you'll notice in this iteration, we've included the bottom floor, which was a restaurant. However, in response to comments we've received about the congestion of the Keating Channel, we have since consolidated that program, removing that and increasing the number of concessions on the floating dock, and also preserve space to include a cafe or some sort of food vendor as part of the floating pool program. Next slide. So since the initial vision, there have been over 30 opportunities for us to collect feedback and comments from over 2,400 people throughout the city, which includes yourselves, the DRP, the City of Toronto, including parks. We've spoken with our Indigenous partners. We've had public surveys. There have been pop-ups around the city. We've spoken with the Waterfront BIA, amongst others. And next slide. Overall, we've heard overwhelming support for the project. People are very excited and really want this project built yesterday. And they want to know what they can do to make this project happen. Particular people are interested in the access to these outdoor pools, which is quite novel, harborfront pools for Toronto. Also interested in the downtown direct access to water-based recreation, and then the possibility of more food and dining options along the waterfront. Next slide. We also received some constructive feedback that we have integrated into today's iteration. Some of the comments we heard were prompts or questions about how we can avoid overcrowding and congestion within the slip, and without just the outside of the slip into the Keating Channel. We were asked to look for ways to enhance the pool's connectivity to the harbor and the lakefront. We were asked to maintain views from outside of the slip, particularly from Queens Quay and Parliament, their new Parliament alignment. We were asked to consider how we can better manage conflict between motorized and non-motorized watercraft, and look for ways to integrate weather protection and year-round access to amenities, and look for ways to ensure safety and security measures, and make sure that they can be seamlessly integrated with the various programs. And then also consider how we can integrate sustainability features into the design. In addition to these comments from yourselves and broader community, we heard some other particular comments from this review panel, in addition to the previous comments, asking us whether or not we could frame the evolution of this wave deck from the other wave decks, also prompting us to look at opportunities to integrate Indigenous stories along the harbor, within this project. Also encouraged us to make sure that this project is designed for all users of all ages and mobilities. Next slide. And that the project be considered, or the possibility that the project be considered as an urban cottage life experience, perhaps potentially incorporating a sauna into the program. And we also heard that the panel does not support a bubbled pool, and encouraged us to continue along the open pool direction. Next slide. So in terms of project schedule, the project is currently unfunded. So Waterfront Toronto is working with our government partners to find ways of progressing the project. And once there has been sufficient progress, we will come back to this DRP for schematic design. As the project update is shared today, we ask that you keep the following questions and issues in mind. Firstly, do you support the revised vision plan? And has the design responded to the needs for maintaining open views, relieving the sense of overcrowding within the slip, reinforcing the connectivity to water, incorporating sustainable approaches to placemaking. Have we eased circulation conflicts between motorized and non-motorized watercraft? And have we planned for ensuring year-round success? Are we able to are we able to ensure safety and security between the pools and the other programming? And overall, has this project reinforced the project's unique site location? And with that, I will hand it off to Shelley, who will share the update with you.
Thank you, Margot. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a good lunch. My name is Shelley Long. I'm a landscape architect and also the design manager for the West 8 DTAH joint venture. I have some other colleagues in another call today for another project, and my other colleague Priscilla, who's the project manager. She is really sick today, so it's just me. But I'm really happy to see you, and we have some new faces on the design review panel, so I'd like to introduce myself as well. Indeed, Margot mentioned we are bringing this project back to DRP for the second time because we as a client and design team really want to get it right. We understand the importance of having a center of gravity on the central waterfront. That's this important pivot point between what we see as the central waterfront, the primary public space, and the Keating Channel District and the future Portland's neighborhoods. And this public space has the opportunity to become a beating blue heart, and we really have gone in depth with our marine programming and also our, working with all the stakeholders to figure out how can this place be a really special place where you can connect with water on all kinds of different ways, that you can touch it, see it, smell it, swim in it, boat on it, and enjoy, special waterfront experiences like dining on a floating pier. So as it will be a service for the new East Bayfront community, but it will also be very connected and complementary in contrast to the Portlands. So where we have a lot of, more nature-based activities in the Portlands, that Parliament Slip really is going to be a high activity beating heart, as I said. So Margot gave a good recap of where we left off. That was in almost 2 years ago. And the key points about the 5 main project components is I think we had some things integrated differently and some things separated differently. So the wave deck and the pool, that was one kind of integrated move at the head of Slip. We had a floating village pier, which I will refer to, and a floating destination restaurant. These were 2 floating components connected underneath future bridge. And then we had 2 kind of boating elements. One was a accessible kayak launch, which is going to be, really amazing opportunity for those with mobility needs to get down onto the water, and a fixed elevation pier, which was for transportation. So since we've been collecting all of the kind of comments through the public consultation, through market soundings, and especially with your expert advice from the DRP, which we really value and appreciate, we've taken 5 moves to the master plan, which we'd like to present back to you today for your feedback. And the first really important move, I think, drives the rest of them. So we're going to present each of the new project components in this order today. What we did was move the pool from this head of Slip built on lake fill, which is being filled now, into a floating barge, and to improve the connection to the lake of the swimming experience and kind of resolve some of the issues around privacy, security, access to the pool. And what that allowed us to do was at the same time scale back the wave deck, which gave us more space within the Slip to make the floating village pier expand as a program element in order to get this kind of critical mass that we learned from our market soundings that such a dining destination needs. We also, as Margot mentioned, combined the floating destination restaurant into a neighborhood amenity, but also into the cultural block 5 potentially, recognizing that global precedents of waterfront cultural events buildings have this ecosystem of a kind of destination cafe restaurant in their building, and then smaller restaurants and eating areas adjacent. And lastly, with the fixed floating pier, we've actually changed that into, we changed the fixed pier into a floating pier. And what that allowed us to do was improve the marine accessibility for the boats. While it does kind of take away the kind of public realm aspect of just walking out to the end of the pier, we wanted to make this really work from a functional point of view. And then the last thing that I've kind of in the middle here is we've folded all of the floating elements within the slip together to relieve some of the congestion. So putting the kayak access into the floating village pier, and I'll take you through how that kind of looks today. So this is the kind of proposed 30% redesign, we call it, that we'd like for you to review today. We're looking at a head of slip that has two components, a wave deck and an activator bench, an expanded floating village pier with integrated amenities and marine access components, a floating transportation pier, and a floating pool barge. And what you see, the theme here is really floating, with the exception of the head of slip. And these really unique experiences, which also give kind of a resilient response to programming on the waterfront. The role of Parliament Slip in the greater context, I'd like to show here a bit of the plan, is that when you arrive from the Distillery District along Parliament Street, coming through a green welcome, that's the Parliament Grove, which our team is also working on. The idea is that you arrive at a really sticky head of space. That's a waterfront arrival with a view of the lake and of the slip, where you stop and you decide, what do I want to do here? Do I go over the bridge or to this cultural anchor? It's Block 5, we call it, in the Quayside development. Do I spend time at the dining destination world here, grab something to eat, get down to the water, rent a boat, launch my own boat? Do I go to Silo Park? Do I go to the community center? Or do I work my way all the way to the water's edge, where I can catch a water taxi, get the water bus, or go swimming on the waterfront, which is really the jewel of the waterfront experience. So I'd like to walk you through each of the project components one by one. And keeping in mind, this is a issues ID for the Parliament Slip Master Plan, so it's not a DRP for the architecture itself, I would like to say. So that's just a reminder and a footnote. We are working with two different architects on our team, MJMA on the floating pool and McKay Lyons Sweet Apple on the floating village pier. And together with MJMA, we did a lot of consultation with Parks, Forestry and Recreation and the City of Toronto to find out how could we make this novel concept of a floating barge work as a public pool, but also for potential different operators and create this really special waterfront experience. The concept that you see on the screen includes an accessible entrance from Merchants Wharf, which helps us resolve some kind of access and emergency vehicle, chlorine delivery, that kind of thing, from Merchants Wharf, where vehicles can drive up. And as you walk through a kind of threshold that would screen views of bathers from the water's edge promenade. So there's a kind of semi-public space here that creates a water world with this transportation pier that functions as a secondary egress for the pool. We're looking at a configuration that has two pools, which is something that is really popular in Toronto. One that could be combined for 25-meter lap and leisure, and a second that would be a bit warmer. We call it a therapy pool, and create a wellness corner on the lake with beautiful views of the island and the lakefront, and by the way, also the CN Tower, of a waterfront facing sauna and a therapy pool, which could be open in the winter. So we're still exploring and researching how to operate the pool year round, who's going to operate it. And this kind of weather screening is also an element that we've developed with the architects, also for the floating village pool, to kind of optimize the shoulder seasons to create these spaces that have, shade and wind protection. You have wind protection from prevailing winds through the change room building here, and a generous deck space for families to put out their chairs and their belongings and hang out with the whole family at the waterfront pool. So there's a number of precedents. This is a mood board that our architects put together for the direction that the pool could go in further design phases. We're looking at something really transparent, warm, materially speaking, universal change rooms that you can see through, but also allow these really great views of the lake. Those are kind of the concepts that we're exploring together. And we did do a lot of research. So one thing that we went away after the DRP and did public consultation workshops was to find out, are we right sizing all of the elements? The Scandinavian approaches that we studied have a lot more deck, but they're also completely public spaces. So given the realities of the kind of fact that pools in Canada have to be a totally closed-off environment with a security checkpoint, we also looked at PFNR pools to double check, are we providing the right amount of pool space for a family and variety of swimming experiences, and what is the deck space in relation to that? And so by doing these double checks, we have come up with a kind of concept design that we think, could be run by PFNR in the future. Putting the pool out next to the transportation pier gives us some win-win scenarios in terms of waterfront access from the gangways, which you can see here on the screen, and also to create a waterfront circuit. So urban grain, this is our Jane Jacobs mentality, that you're wandering on a circuit on the waterfront and you make eye contact and you explore different levels. So this secondary gangway that accesses directly to this floating transportation pier would lead to a dual freeboard pier. And that would allow for two different kinds of water transportation, smaller scale taxis and larger scale water buses, which we don't have on the waterfront today, but we hope, as an aspiration that any day now we could tie Parliament Slip into a really wonderful future waterfront transport network with water buses and little ferries that take you to different places. But on day one, could really function as a place where people step on and get to the island from the eastern waterfront. So it's really exciting program. Next is the floating village and boat launch. So as I mentioned, moving the pool out into the inner harbor allowed us to shrink the wave deck and extend this floating village. And what we've also done is kind of combined the wheelchair accessible kayak launch, the kayak back of house and potential rental facilities onto one big floating area, floating public space. It includes a kind of patio plaza space for approximately 100 people and 17 vendor kiosks. And along the edge of the entire floating pier, space for boats to moor. So the marine functionality really came first. You can see we have a kind of 2.5 meter offset of all of the buildings from the edge of the pier, and that's to allow for, on the left here, the accessible kayak launch, but also for a future potential electric boat share or small scale human powered boat watercraft, so that the inner slip could be occupied by small scale human powered watercraft, and the outer harbor would be where the larger boats would stay, and the bridge is a kind of a component that would help create that divide between the two types of water space. In this conceptual plan, you can also see we've considered a diversity of vendor sizes, but also really focused on creating more spaces, and also what I mentioned for the pool, these kind of covered transitional indoor-outdoor spaces, so that we can extend the seasonal accessibility of each pier. We have two different gangways leading onto the pier for access. One you can see is at an angle. It's much longer than the other. That's because one is designed for a wheelchair and is more comfortable for strollers and deliveries for the vendors. And the other is what you would expect kind of from a typical marine experience, a very steep gangway that will fluctuate as the water goes up and down, that provides a kind of shortcut back up to the water's edge promenade. So again, that circuit connectivity is something that comes into play. And we were really inspired by our neighbors in Halifax, and we even so inspired that we had to get an architect from the Maritimes to help us, design this space. And this sketch on the upper right-hand side illustrates the concept of a village and a loggia. So again, occupying that kind of in-between space and creating a family of small scale buildings that are linked together as a village typology. This is a mood board provided by architects, MLSA, including one of their projects, showing this idea of a village that also really lights up at the night, in the evening, at the night, so that there's a really kind of cozy feeling, this light that draws you into the waterfront, which would reflect beautifully off of the lake. But also on the left, referencing the historic shed typology on the Toronto waterfront. So kind of balancing these two is the direction that we would like to go and explore kind of the materiality of what does it mean to be a waterfront building, a marine building. And tying a ribbon together on the whole project, we think, is this head of slip. So as you arrive to Parliament Slip by foot or from the Martin Goodman Trail or on the TTC, or if you're walking from the Distillery District, you're drawn by a couple of things. First, there's this beautiful view of the lake that we've kind of opened up by the removal of the pool building, and the iconic wave deck, which doubles as our wayfinding for the project. So how do you know you're at Parliament Slip? Well, it's going to have a unique wave deck that only Parliament has, the same way Simcoe and Reese and Spadina have their own character. It's a place where that connects on the left-hand side the community center to Silo Park, and these are two really important public amenities for the neighborhood. But it also is a place to rest and sit on the edge of the wave deck and look around and just enjoy people watching, boat watching, to eat your food that you bought in one of the dining facilities, and maybe in this case, enjoy the shade and the microclimate of a tree. You'll see what's different from other heads of slips, I will call them, on the western waterfront is we have a kind of double element here, including an activator bench and a wave deck. And we see these as kind of cousins in the same language, one working over the water and one working on the lake fill area to create a special gathering space that's inclusive of all ages and abilities and welcoming place to dwell on the waterfront. And these are some concept sketches of what that experience might look and feel like. Again, we supported a lot of this with research on what was working well and what was not working well in other parts of the waterfront. We have this amazing living laboratory that we get to visit every time we're in Toronto, and also discussed, with users of the spaces and managers of the spaces. I show Jarvis Slip here because we spent a lot of time thinking about Jarvis. And what we concluded was at Jarvis, we have this problem of what we call a leaky space. It's too big to program for pop-ups. It's too small to program for events. People seem to pass through it without stopping and treating it like its own space. And that's partly also to do with kind of industrial barriers that we have from the Redpath factory. But we also looked at the dimensions, and these dimensions to us was something we wanted to avoid at the head of slip. And with the existing lake fill, if we were to not put in, this activator bench, we would end up with a space exactly like Jarvis head of slip. And was that what we wanted? So if we look at Reese and we look at Simcoe, we found that this kind of paved granite area at the head of slip that kind of feels like it's part of Queen's Quay, that there's a sweet spot between about 6.5 to 11 meters that makes it feel comfortable as an east-west passageway, but also able to carry all of the big pedestrian flows in the summer months. And then the size of the wave deck, we realized we have to have at least 10 meters, maybe even larger if we want to make this an iconic wave deck, one that bookends the waterfront from silo to silo. And it has to have its own language to really feel like an extension of the public space. How the other slips function, we also realize is that there's these big open kind of hardscape plaza spaces, which I'm pointing out on the screen now. And these really act as pop-up activation spaces next to the heads of slip so that the heads of slip themselves can be places of passageway and stopping and taking your time at the waterfront. And we have that luckily on Parliament in front of the Aqua Luna building, but we also have a great park next door where really big events can happen. So to tie all of the project components together, you've noticed we have a lot of wood in our renderings. We'd still like to continue the research that we have on wood products on the waterfront to find, what is the best practice at the time of building, and this is something we'll specify later. But continuity in the materiality and the detailing, we think of the wood elements will be one thing that can really tie all of these elements of Parliament Slip together, whether or not it's a building or a pier or a wave deck. And to double check, this is the new master plan that we have on the right-hand side compared to the scale and the programming we have in the other slips with marine activation. And what you see is we think that we've reached a good balance between how much, let's say, infrastructure we're putting in the slip for marine activity and how much space there is for boats to kind of sail around and get around. And that really was enabled by moving this one big program element we had out to the waterfront. So I touched a little bit on accessibility and gangways, and I wanted to just focus on that for a minute because we have the draft waterfront accessibility design guidelines came out a few months ago. And we did take this very seriously and looked at many other waterfronts, how they resolve this idea of different levels of water and access to waterfront programs with all these different water levels. And what we have applied in our project is in the waterfront draft accessibility guidelines that we're basing all the designs of gangways to get to floating elements on the lowest point of the season, which is in the summer, and so that the gangway is not steeper than 1 in 12. And this is actually a global best practice. I actually don't know if any other waterfronts off the top of my head have such clear guidelines on accessibility. So it's really fantastic that our client team is taking the leadership on this. But what we also have allowed for is on the western side of the dock wall, this ability for what we call plug and play. And that means that new vendors, additional waterfront access could be anchored to the dock wall, much like in the other heads of slip. We also thought it was very important that the land access was balanced with the water access. We considered that boats will be coming to and from here from the Portlands, potentially crossing the Keating Channel, but also to our marine transportation pier. And as I mentioned earlier, kind of vehicular emergency access to both the transportation pier and the swimming pool. But that most of the people will be kind of conglomerating and arriving at the head of slip. And in putting together this new master plan, I think there's some key views that we considered. Those are the big blue arrows in the scheme, and the orange ones are ones we'd like to preserve. So for example, we have a historic view of silo buildings, which should be preserved from Queen's Quay. And we really had to preserve the privacy of the swimmers on the lake. And briefly, the sustainability components that we're exploring, again, we're at a very early stage in the design, but pool heating, we're looking for renewable, lake or waste heat sources, including energy modeling in our scope to see how we can heat the pool sustainably. I mentioned wood. Water transportation, this is a great alternative to using automobiles, for example, and we would love to host the Toronto's first electric boat share here as well. Hidden underneath the water, which I have no illustrations of, we have a big plan for aquatic habitat similar to the other heads of slips, which is also being carried out in tandem with our lake fill project. So we're looking at aquatic habitat holistically with the lake fill and the Parliament slip. And of course, gas-free cooking on the pier. So I mentioned a little bit about winter use with each of the elements. One thing that really came forward in all of our workshops is that we can't treat all the seasons equally. We know that although we're Canadian and we love our winters and we want to use our waterfronts better in the winter, the truth is we use them more in the summer. So we've prioritized and optimized each of the designs for the summer because we accept that's the most active season and it has to work in our peak season. But we don't do that at the cost of a bad winter experience. So these threshold conditions will help when the programming is open in the summer, the shoulder seasons and the winter. Maybe there's reduced programming, but maybe there's different programming, like the village floating pier could be an extension of the Christmas market from the distillery district, but on a floating waterfront environment with fire pits so that you can feel the wind on the lake. You know, like these are elements and moments that are really special to the project. So to conclude, these are the 4 components: the floating pool barge, the floating transportation pier, the floating village pier, and the head of slip that we're looking for your feedback on today. And we're really looking forward to building and improving on this special piece of waterfront to make a Eastern blue heart for Toronto. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. It's a great presentation. So we're gonna do a round of questions and then we'll move to comments after. So, Danny, you want to start this time?
Thank you. Well, I know the question part, but I just wanted to say thank you to the team for this redesign. I think it's a huge improvement, and as much as I actually liked the pool as part of the pier itself integrated, I like it even more as a barge and moves it into a very contemporary experience of pool culture in cities, and I think that's really positive. I just have a question about shade. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of shade integrated into the scheme now. I know you'll be thinking about it, but I'm wondering what your ideas are, particularly with respect to the pool barge, because you'll really fry in summer, and I can imagine families lying out there all day long.
Sure, thanks for the question. I wanted to flash this image on the screen to show kind of the approach that we would like to explore for shade, which is kind of integrating them into the threshold conditions of the building so that we have an edge where you can be in the shade, but then yeah, there is a big deck where you're in the sun, and we know that Canadians also love to get the sun exposure in the summertime. But it's a good point, and you know, maybe it's something that we have to work out further with the operators as well. If you have umbrellas, for example, so it's a balance between what's architectural and in the base scheme and what's the operator allows.
Yeah, I would really encourage that, because right now that's great along the edge, but you're kind of pushing everybody to the edge if they want to have shade. And it would be nice to have some kind of system that in the high season, there's, you know, poles and umbrellas or some flexible way to allow people to be right on the deck.
And I just wanted to add for the floating village pier, we have a kind of similar, just go to the image here. Yeah, similar ideas that we'd like to explore, you know, that there's these areas where you can be in the shade next to the building or between the buildings and occupy the space between.
Okay. Thank you. Patty, any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. I just have a couple of quick questions. The first one is the deck on the barges, and excuse my ignorance on the subject, but are they modular pieces? Like, could they be bigger or smaller or shift and change, or is it one static shape that is not very flexible?
Sorry, do you mean like the rectangle shape?
The actual, yeah. So for I know you know, so you did this wonderful scale comparison, and then you based this deck on PF&R's pools. Well, we could tell that the ones in Scandinavia are a lot bigger. So I'm wondering, because this is a very special pool, it's not a typical PF&R city pool. If it proves to be really successful, can we add more deck later on? Is it a modular thing, or is this a one-time, we got to get the size perfectly right now and call it a day and get a new pool if it proves way too successful?
Okay, the size of the barge is based actually on an idea of 2 modules of a floating barge. That's a standard size. Sorry, I don't know it out of my head, but our marine engineers did recommend that this is the size we have. And that's actually why we have a kind of informal divide here. We have 1 pool on 1 barge and 1 on the other. In theory, Fadi, to answer your question, I guess it could, if you extended the servicing and that sort of thing. But we do also have the transportation pier located next to it. But I will say, yeah, I think it gives you more flexibility for sure than, for example, the pool we had in the wave deck.
Okay, so there is a potential to add an extra pier, an extra just deck barge without a pool in it if we wanted to.
For example.
And then the other question is the bridge, right? It appears in all the renders, beautiful bridge, really central to the original competition entry. And I'm just wondering, how critical is the bridge here for access to all the other amenities and elements and the flow of this Parliament slip, which also seems to be a bit more unique and packed with programs than the other slips? Is the bridge just like, I know there's still no funding for all of this, but is the bridge an accessory here or is it central to the flow and the program and the connections? And how could we think about the bridge in relation to the other elements?
I can start by saying the bridge is not part of the scope of the Parliament Slip project. It's part of the broader sort of waterfront-wide system of stitching these together. With the activation of both the east and west side of the slip, it becomes an important piece. I don't think it's one you need maybe day one as part of delivering the project, and they can coexist without the bridge. However, we obviously are still trying to stitch together, especially a few key locations across the slips. And I don't know, Shelley, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think I would just add that, we also think that the bridges are important for the urban connectivity and to make, right now, when you walk along the waterfront and you have to go back and forth along the slip edges, it takes quite a long time, right? So the bridges as a shortcut, also you can even see the bridge to the Keating, over the Keating Channel as one of these really important shortcuts. We think, as Pina said, later in the project, if we have all of these components along the water's edge, it'll be important connector for sure. And also to help divide the 2 water spaces I talked about, the inner slip and the outer harbor.
Okay. Actually, it's a good time to make a comment on the bridge. Pina's right. It's not part of the scheme, but if and when it ever happens, one thing we'll have to be cognizant of. So I saw little sailboats in the slip. The bridge has to be high enough, obviously, for the mast on the smallest sailboat to get under. So
We did look at that.
goes without saying. Yeah.
The littlest ones can get in there.
Can they?
The name of it.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah.
Boat person, but certainly as Kelly pointed out, it's
Sure. Okay, Betsy, you have a time constraint, so if you want to make your questions clear now, and maybe you want to add comments, I'm not sure.
I'll just add one comment because really am in favor of the changes that you've made. I think it's a huge improvement over what we saw last time, and everything feels like it has enough space. I like the increased food kind of service barge with the smaller retail on it. I think it's all really positive. My one comment would be to, when it gets to the point where you can enter schematic on the pool, to be, I think, more bold with the plan, because it does feel like a small, more polite version of the kinds of pool decks that you see overseas. I was at the pool in our house last year, and the paid portion is behind a gate, similar to how you have to enter a gate to get into our pools here. But there was a free walkable, that swoop. Any pedestrian can just step off the deck, walk the swoop, and go back. And when people are at the water's edge, they really want to be on the water's edge. And so having this piece put out into the water should invite the public onto the water. Maybe it's a connection back to the wave decks, where you have a wave deck kind of perched over the cafe. So people see a wave deck, they know it's public, they go there. Or some integration of a connection between a public connection to the edge of that where someone could sit and just walk around and look at it, I think that'd be a positive addition to that piece.
Great.
Thank you so much. I think it's a great presentation. I'm really hoping that the funding comes through sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Okay, Pina, any questions?
Yeah, I just actually continuing exactly what Betsy was saying. I had a similar question, but also adding to the idea of bicycles. I think there's such an opportunity here to connect to that Water's Edge Promenade, even as a separate project. I mean, this is my favorite stage of urban design, where we're actually looking in detail at the broad brush strokes, so to speak. And so I feel like there is maybe the perpendicular relationship to specifically the gangways that go from that promenade to the pool decks. It feels only pedestrian as well, and maybe there needs to be a more layered and parallel connection that then maybe allows bicycles even to loop in, and that you don't necessarily need to have this big commitment to go either you're on the barge or you're on the promenade, right? So I love the whole accessibility study. I think we should be going beyond any of these parameters, which I think this has absolutely potential to do. But I would add to it not just that different mobility of bicycles and wheelchairs and strollers, but actually just the girth of how many, like what's the crowd capacity here? And given that there's these sort of 2 point relative, 2 single points, does that get really crowded? Is this like the X where you're like waiting and walking, like off and on at the, when it starts to close, and you know what I mean? I think that maybe it's even the capacity, what's the experience, not just slope wise, but, crowd wise. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or response there?
Yeah, maybe I'll just respond to the last point, Pina, about the experience of waiting. We do have a very excellent world-class Water's Edge Promenade that will be waiting to receive the visitors. So I'm really positive about that. Also in the context of shade, that people waiting to go to the pool could wait along the Water's Edge with benches and with shade. And that's a wonderful experience in and of itself. But indeed, we will take the point about bicycles back to our client and design team.
Okay, thank you. Emily, any questions?
Yes. Shelley, could you talk a little bit about the relationship with the community center and potential spill out of programming? I think you had a quick reference to it, but I want to understand a little bit more about that relationship, and if you've had more discussions with PFNR or whoever is going to be managing the community center.
Sure. Maybe I'll use this plan quickly to explain it. So the community center is located in a kind of long bar here on the ground floor of the Aqualuna building, spilling out onto the web. And the design of the facade of the building is to have sort of glass doors that can open up into the web, so you have a really fluid indoor-outdoor experience, again, in the summer months. I think that the space between the community center and the wave deck, that's actually, we're going to be building that soon. Pina can give you an update on the timing of that. But we see this as kind of an in-between space on the Water's Edge Promenade that could be used for programming, but the wave deck also provides a really important kind of mid-slip connection. Let's say if you don't want to go all the way to Queen's Quay, that you can walk across to the park. But we also see the wave deck as a place that you could program to use for events, like say you want to do an outdoor yoga class, or a boxing class, or urban sports outdoors, really popular after Corona. And you don't want to do it in a park setting, but in a really like photogenic, unique waterfront setting. And I think that the wave deck could really complement the community center in that regard. Indeed, Parks, Forestry and Recreation will be managing both the park and the community center. So it'll be important to continue working with them to make sure that the wave deck is like usable in that sense.
No, I don't see.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David, you want to go next?
Yeah, just one question, and thanks, Shelley, again for the presentation. In terms of that kind of green armature that you have down both sides of the slip that frame the slip itself, is that is there a relationship to what you're doing north of Queens Quay in terms of that kind of forest green concept that you talked about? What's the connection between the two is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, definitely. So, David, I'm not sure if you saw our presentation last time for the Quayside Public Realm, but the Parliament Grove and this kind of eastern side of the slip, that's part of the Quayside Public Realm design. And I don't have this diagram by me, but we have a beautiful idea of kind of extending a green edge along the waterfront all the way over the Keating Channel Bridge and into the Portlands. And so definitely it's an aspiration to continue this kind of urban forest character. That's the concept for Quayside into Water's Edge Promenade 3.0, where we have, you know, bigger open planters, more space for roots and soil and oxygen and natural materials like stones where you can sit on the Water's Edge Promenade. And together with our partner CETA, we're working on translating that also to the western side of the slip. So the Water's Edge Promenade here will have a different character than what we know and you can see outside of your building today. And that's definitely to do with this kind of transition point into the eastern Keating Channel District.
Thank you. That was it.
Okay, Sheila?
No questions.
No, no questions. Eric?
Question. The market barge, the dining destination area, how does it get serviced? How do you, because you're not a lot of vendors and all that, how do they, because there's no road getting to it, so just trying to understand the logistic of how this happens.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something we still have to work out in more detail, Eric, but there's kind of two service points. One being this street next to Block 5, where larger vehicles can drive. We've also discussed with the client team, you know, do we integrate a storage area, cold storage area into Block 5, where folks can store ingredients and food. But there's also the potential for maybe smaller cart or vehicle access onto the Water's Edge Promenade. And we right now have designed the Water's Edge Promenade to maintain emergency vehicle access. So in theory, it should be possible. But then that you're bringing materials from your little vans or trucks with a rolling cart down to the floating pier. And this is something I see daily because in Rotterdam, outside of our office, we have a floating office building actually with a kind of 5-star restaurant on the end. And so they get deliveries and we went and talked to them, you know, they get their vegetables once a week, and then they get their fish and other more fresh things almost every day. And that's exactly how it works. So the little van parks close to the Water's Edge Promenade and the guys bring it down to the pier. The second thing is garbage, taking the waste off. And again, I think we're going to have to work with the Block 5 building, this cultural building, to make sure we have a permanent storage place so that it's not just cluttering the web or creating kind of back of house on the pier side here.
Okay, Kevin? Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, okay.
Is there, as part of the, especially the head of slip or other places, is there, because I really like, for example, with what they have in Halifax where you can walk down and really you have kids like touching the water. Are they, is there some, I wasn't quite sure if the head of split maybe had a zone like that, or is there someone else within the slip that has a kind of a zone where without being part of, you know, the gangway to the pool or to the that little transit slip, or that you could, that is separate from all that, so that kids and things can just hang out and basically touch the water and walking.
Yeah, I think right now in the scheme, if you wanted to go down and touch the water, you would definitely come down to one of the floating elements, and it would certainly facilitate that. They have a very low freeboard, for example, here, only about 30 centimeters, so you can, or half a meter, so you can get in and out of a kayak. So it's definitely within reach. In terms of the wave decks, there's a number of considerations. I would say the wave deck is a wooden structure by nature, and you know, typically we don't want wood to be coming in and out of water a lot, so it's a bit of a question of materiality there.
What's the difference in elevation between the head of slip and the water? Is it a meter or two? Is it
So all of the dock walls around Parliament Slip are around 77.1 meters. And the historic summer average is 75. So it's about 2 meter difference on an average. But then if you look at the 100-year high, which we experienced, I think 3 times in the last 6 years, almost, then it's within less than a meter of the lake level.
Thank you. Kevin, any questions?
Thank you. Very exciting project. Did I hear correctly? Maybe this is a two-part question. Did I hear correctly? A chlorine pool is being proposed?
Oh, we haven't figured that out yet.
Oh, then forget my part two. The rest will come in comments.
I know last time there was a discussion of a saltwater pool.
Well, this is what I want to get at. Yeah.
No, unfortunately, we're not at that level of detail yet with the pool design.
Oh, sure.
I just had a question with regard to where the pools are located, the determination of it being on the west side versus on the east side. Seems like there's some synergy between Silo Park and the cultural center, and just wondering why the pool is located where it is.
For sure.
Yeah, maybe
sure.
I take it back.
Sorry, I talked to you.
No, that's
earlier.
okay. I mean, Shelley can speak to it too, but I think the challenge of the east side, because I agree with you programmatically, make a lot of sense in some ways to tie it into Block 5. But then we get back to, I think, the concern the panel had around the floating restaurant, which is it becomes this kind of obstacle or cork in the neck of the Keating Channel, because the Keating Channel you don't really see, but it's right there on the right-hand side. And so that whole water body basically gets blocked off at the end visually by the pool. And this rendering doesn't give you enough view of the Keating to really see that relationship, but I think that was a big concern. The other reason to put it here was that operationally, it can link along the promenade back to the community center or the recreation center that Parks is going to run, and they would do some of the pool operation out of that landside building. So those were the reasons. So you can kind of see, if you imagine it on the right-hand side, it'd be like right in the mouth of the Keating Channel. Those were the two reasons that we put it on the west side. Yeah.
We put it on the side before we do this, but with the bridge. Now having funding, it also would be in conflict. With the bridge on the side, and it will be very tight if it fits at all. So.
Okay, let's go to comments then. Betsy's gone. I thought she didn't go until after 2.
You have to go soon, so.
You have to go, so
Yeah,
why don't you go,
thank you.
Janet? Yeah.
So, yeah, just 2 things. I know it's early in the day for the detailed design, but I think it would be really advantageous to get the programming to a certain point on the pool barge, because although I like it's very tidy, the way you have the sauna as part of that strip building at the west side. I think if this is going to be a sauna that's used 12 months a year, there's an optimal relationship between the sauna and all the pools, if all the pools are going to be open 12 months a year, or which one is, because the opportunity to go from the sauna to a cold plunge pool or a hot plunge pool, I think is part of fulfilling the promise of what this is as a public space. And so I think there has to be a really close look at the programming and relationship between the different amenities that are being offered on that barge. And then the other thing, and this is just an intuitive response so far, so I'd like to see more dimensions on the floating village pier, because if I forecast forward to a really great summer day, I think there are so many kiosks there. There's not going to be enough room to handle the people who want to go there for lunch or a drink or whatever. I think there's a better balance that needs to be struck between the built and the open space along that barge. I think the final thing I would say is any kind of metrics that you can develop for peak people loads in summer should be done sooner rather than later, and allow that in the next layout of the entire slip to influence the spaces in between the constructed built elements, because my feeling is this is going to be as successful as Promontory Park, and it's going to need a lot of room for people just to move. And particularly in summer when it's really hot, there's a lot of just friction between crowds of people. Other than that, it's super exciting.
Great, thank you. Pina? Comments?
Yes, thank you. I would just add that I think that I'm in favor of actually expanding the entire pool floating barge, just seconding all the comments that have already been made. And I would feel like that there should be this kind of parallel or expansion of the waterfront promenade, almost like another interstitial parallel layer, so people could actually experience the crossover or the displacement from the promenade without having to commit to going into the saunas or pools or that space. So I feel like it should just be more ambitious. It should get bigger, and maybe according to Fadi's incremental sort of floating sections that could work that way. I would also encourage in the next iterations and representations of it. I think what Chris was saying was really important, because I keep trying to imagine Keating there. It is a very different, like there's such a charged sort of proximity to a lot of these things. Like when we're talking about the waterfront, it's such a big scale. I'm always needing to have clues to remind myself at what scale we're talking here. So including the not just like, for example, in this view, if we saw the edge or how close that was, but also views from the Parliament slip back to the lake. You talked about from the pool. From the pools, you actually could see the CN Tower given the bend. Is there like open lake versus, and this ambition to kind of be at the cottage when you're actually leaving the city and being at the cottage? I think those views back to the other way would be also important.
Okay, thank you. David?
Sure. Thanks for the, again, Shelley, for the presentation. I feel that this is one of those moments on the waterfront that is really going to mark a change in the way that we perceive the inner harbor. Often I've been down and have thought about the Copenhagen waterfront and how they cleaned up that waterfront. And I was there in May a few years ago, and the edges of that waterfront were lined with teenagers jumping into that freezing cold water. When the pools were busy, it was remarkable. And I think that this is going to signal to, it's going to be a signal to ourselves, a signal to the city that we really need to clean up the inner harbor and create a stronger relationship between us and the water itself. And this is going to be the first time when you actually, aside from those piers at some harborfront, are out on the waterfront, not being in a boat, that is, where you can walk out there and be on the water. And I hope that it does motivate us to think of the inner harbor in a different way. And maybe this becomes, the downtown beach area of the city. I think and I do think that, agreeing with some of the earlier comments in terms of the amount of space there, I think it's going to be, immensely popular. I think that one of the challenges with the Toronto waterfront in the shoulder seasons, we all know, is that we're out in the lake because of landfill, and it can get very windy and be sometimes uncomfortable, even when it's quite comfortable downtown. And I think wind protection is going to be something to think about. And some of those great wind protection furniture that I've seen on European beaches, I think might be one way to integrate wind protection into that kind of pool area, so that you can be really comfortable sitting there, out, essentially out in the lake. I think the small scale retail is really a beautiful idea. Like the architecture, and of course Brian Makeda's wonderful work. So I'm confident that it will be a remarkable place from that perspective. But otherwise, thank you. I think it's really motivational.
Great. Fatty, comments?
Thank you so much. This is such a thrilling project. And as David mentioned and others, it's really going to be a hit and really change our relationship with the water. And I can't help but think that Claude Cormier is smiling down on us on this moment, imagining us swimming in the lake to some extent. So thanks for that. And I do think that I know that it's really early, but as a schematic, just to kind of Betsy's point, maybe the pool deck itself could potentially be a bit more ambitious insofar that it is designed to enclose within it a public access point and a more private point. The public access point could be just as simple as an echo of a wave deck that's maybe just a walkway that circles around the pool or gets you out to the edge of that deck. It could also be potentially incorporated seating in it and shade structures. So there's leeway in which maybe the relationship of the pier, bridge, building, structure, seating, access itself all could be integrated in a way that is a bit more imaginative for the next phase. And I really appreciate how you kind of measured things like PFNR typical pool decks, but this is by no means going to be a typical PFNR pool. So I think, you do have a bit of leeway in extending it a little bit more. In terms of the restaurants, barges, and others, I don't know if you guys recall, but there used to be a second cup where the Beaver Tails is restaurant at the end of York Slip. That patio would be packed all year round. Sun, shade, cold wind, whenever it is, because there's an appetite to be this close to the water. So as others have mentioned, I could just imagine that restaurant, activate pier area be completely busy. So this idea that maybe we can measure and begin to assess maximum, minimum people use on the piers and on the slip earlier on, so that you could help dictate, just kind of like how you did with the Jarvis slip study, this idea of kind of maximum, minimum capacity, so that it doesn't become a victim of its own success in other ways as well, right? So I think that's just one element that the schematic could begin to address in terms of circulation. But I think there's a lot of really exciting elements here. And again, reminds us how special seeing our evolving waterfront do really unique, amazing things that are really rare in many other cities. So thanks for that.
Great. Thanks, Patty. Gina? Comments?
Thank you, Shelley. That was it's always inspiring to hear what you're thinking about and drawing. I think, like everyone else, I think it's really, really strong and really advanced in a positive direction and really flexible. But I think as you develop it and you move past this kind of concept, I think there are a lot of opportunities the team are sharing around enhancing its flexibility, uniqueness, and publicness. Those were three things that I just kept seeing in my own mind. Right now, they could kind of read as like discrete single-use programs tethered to the ground with like little strings of circulation. And I think there's just a huge opportunity to think about this as like a new edge that's more unified somehow. I know there's a lot of constraints we can't see, but I think even in the way, I think Fadi was just talking about the way the path or the connection to the pool deck lands, that could be made such a public gesture with topography, with seating, with places to get out over the water, and be so much stronger. And I think from working on other riverfront and waterfront sites myself, I always feel like we never quite know what that retail mix is going to be that's going to work on a site like the deck. So I just kept thinking, oh, what if it's just a architectural armature that has infrastructure and it's not so prescriptive about stalls or shapes? Because it could be one big restaurant or it could be a series of small places. And I think you'd want to give yourself the flexibility to try it and embrace the experimentation that comes with floating program more. And then lastly, I think I loved the precedents, but I feel like you guys are going to do something that's going to transcend those same places we've seen before, the deck platform, barges. And I think green infrastructure could play a huge role in that. Like, what is this doing environmentally? Are there green aspects to the deck, or vegetated or aquatic habitat creating? I think it could just be like a whole nother landscape driven approach to what these places are that could be pretty phenomenal. and consistent with your like ethic of the green forest that surrounds, you know, this neighborhood. I think it could be spectacular. So thanks for letting me share my thoughts.
Eric?
Well, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I'll echo my colleagues' comments. I think it's fully support the direction. I think it's a huge improvement. I think it's compared to what we've seen. It appears to be a long time ago. This is, you know, the move of the pool, the opening of the view of Parliament, from Parliament, looking at the lake. I think, like, you know, how you're going to frame all that. I think that is wonderful. It is. It's quite great. I think that, you know, I strongly believe it's going to be a very successful area. You know, definitely be something that's needed as part of the destination on the waterfront. And the comments about right sizing it. I mean, you've got a great team there. I think you're going to be spending a lot of time making sure that, you know, it is right sized to what it is supposed to be. I love the floating pool. What I would love to is, if you were able to create a little planted area within, integrated to it in terms of having some vegetation, I think that would add a dimension of magic in it. If there was like a bit of a kind of a little oasis, a little cluster, something to think about. I think that, you know, how do we kind of enhance that experience of the around the pool and in the floating in the water? So something that is just something to continue to look as a potential opportunity. I think the head of the slip, I think, you know, the right sizing looks great. I think that as you develop understanding, you know, because a lot of, as you notice on some of your analysis, some of the head of the slip are not as successful as other around the waterfront. So the right sizing, but what are the, you know, the opportunity for animation, you know, and also making the right infrastructure available? Are they pop-ups? Are they little food trucks sometimes? Are they things that can be programmed? Are they could it be places for temporary installation? And I think that, you know, there might be an important, and I can't remember from the public art strategy, if there is potential place there for either some permanent public art or some temporary open arts, a place that it can actually be something, again, that can add to the dimension of the destination there. There is I think that having a place where you can, that is less programmed, where you can actually have access to the water. I'm just thinking for kids. I think that you can actually go and touch a bit like they've done in Halifax, in other places. I think that's something that, you know, I would offer. That would be something that would be great. The last point, which I could have made reference to, I think which is just a normal part of evolution of the strategies, is how you're going to service the vendors. Is it, like you said, there's different strategies? Could there be a water strategy as well, where you can actually have a boat in a central place later and then centralize things? Or is it something that, because even if it's on the land side, you know, you're going to have to protect for some area, because given the number of vendors you'll have actually more of these trucks that you probably think you may have, especially if it's a restaurant, lots of garbage. So just thinking about that dimension. Great. Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess maybe an optimistic perspective, being a designer, I do feel it's going to be extremely popular destination, and it's been said a bunch of times, you know, what's the right scale? And I'm wondering, without you know, overcommitting to such huge infrastructural elements like, you know, floating pools, can there be any overflow that's programmed into the promenade? I mean, I feel like the floating pool, you're going to get these units of families that are of various sizes, but they're fairly large chunks of slow moving kind of, you know, people, strollers and coolers and what have you. And you know, instead of it being kind of a blockage, is there any way, you know, it's super popular, that edge of the waterfront could also be programmed with again, the shading elements or little places where, you know, you've arrived, maybe you've had a swim, maybe you've left, or maybe it's super busy, but you're not kind of immediately discouraged. I just think it's going to be a super popular destination. Again, a very, very subjective statement, but the dining barge, we've made reference to Halifax, and I was there last summer, and it was incredibly busy. And that's attached to, you know, a city with parks. There's a lot of, it was actually, I was there in July, and it was actually very, very difficult to walk from one end, 1 kilometer to the other kilometer, through the masses of people and families. And that was with all the overflow. So, you know, if this place is popular, I just feel like you can potentially, you know, build in spill space as part of the project, and that could help facilitate this idea of it maybe being too popular. I just think it's such a great idea. That's one sort of very general comment. More specifically on the, say, renewable technology, green infrastructure, highly recommend that the pool, you know, not be a chlorine-based pool. That's, you know, ultimately super dangerous. There are other technologies, as we all know, like saltwater pools, but also biofilter pools. Can there be a portion of the plan that's a biofilter, that's its own kind of amenity and special place? But also, you know, there's one pool you mentioned that's going to be operational year round. So heating will be a concern there. Well, I just want to make sure that the panel recommends solar thermal heating for this facility. That's you know, free heat as far as I'm concerned, free heat all year round. So I would love to see that explored as a heating technology. If it has to go to an electrified system, you have you're directly above a heat source, right? Even though the lake gets cold, it doesn't get as cold as the air. It gets maybe 1 degree, or 1 degree is maybe the coldest it gets, but it gets warmer all year round. So that's a heat source. You don't have to do geothermal. It's a form of geothermal, I guess. So you could lay some coils down at the bottom of the basin and run a geo-source heat pump from the lake water. So I hope these technologies are explored to lower the operational impact.
Great, thank you. I think that's everyone. No, I'm sorry. No.
That's okay. Thank you, Shelley, for the presentation. It was so great. And I really also want to say thank you to Waterfront Toronto to pivoting and taking all of the comments. I really think that all of the elements were there. They just didn't seem to be in the right place. And now they are distributed in a really clever way that's going to not only make an amazing space on its own right, but it also plugs back into the urban context in really supportive ways as well. So that I think that there's a real kind of symbiotic relationship with East Bayfront and Quayside and the whole context. I was just in Copenhagen this past spring, and it was amazing seeing these teenagers just like jumping off into the freezing cold water. And so I think that the location of the pool to give some privacy to people is really great. I also think that there might have to be like a gradation that for people who want the privacy, they can have it. But then that edge that everybody's been talking about along the general promenade, that actually could be a place of spectacle for those types of people who actually want to be more extroverted and you know, bring that kind of energy out to the edge there. I think there's a lot of potential there. I'm going to go back to my question I had about the community center, and this one's a little bit more urgent because it sounds like you all are going to be building it soon. I really think that it's great that you have looked at the head of the slip and right-sized it for different types of program that could happen as a spill out to the community center. But I also encourage you to just maybe look at the kind of immediate space near the community center to see if there needs to be a little bit more breathing room as program might spill out into that space adjacent to it, because everything else is really kind of activated along all the edges except for that one. It feels like it's just the Promenade has kind of taken the lead there, and which is fine, it should, but I think that the program at that corner with the community center, maybe there's a more focused area there that could respond to that program within the community center. It just feels that it's still pretty thin space. And I'm imagining that people are going to want to be able to have some ability to have that program spill out. So that's the only things, to knowing that what's coming on down the line, that you won't have that right now. So maybe that space needs to be a little bit more right-sized for that.
Great. Okay, I think
Paul,
now it
Paul,
is.
can I add one quick
Yeah,
thing, real quick?
yeah.
It also seems, just from an earlier conversation, that we're kind of agnostic about the phasing, and I'm wondering if the design team did consider a few scenarios around which elements they would imagine coming first would be crucial, just for conversation's sake in the schematic. I would imagine, if you got a pot of money and then you had to say what would be the first three things in order that you think are crucial. I mean, I would have a hunch of what I think, maybe the pool, but I would just imagine if the design team had to think of it in terms of flow of program or elements of servicing or other things that might be crucial, like dock wall, reinstating or pushing certain infrastructure in and out, like sewer or heating, like different elements that might seem not so clear from the onset, but might be essential to the success of the design overall. A kind of bunch of phasing scenarios might just be helpful in cementing what order these things might come in, even if they're just for conversation's sake. But just to throw that out there.
No, that's great. Thanks for adding that. Okay, I think that's everybody. So, boy, a lot of great comments. I'm gonna try and summarize them into themes and then go through a list here. And first of all, everybody is very supportive and loves the changes and the concepts that you put forward. We all agree it's going to be very, very popular. And I want to underscore what Kevin said. I was in Halifax Waterfront last summer as well, and you couldn't move. And it's a small city. And there was one image that McKay Lyons had in the slide deck that show, kiosks and various things. And I'll be very honest, there's some tacky stuff there, like the beaver tails and whatever, but there's some really nice, it's the diversity of experience on the Halifax waterfront, from the high-end restaurant right to the beaver tail and everything else in between. So I say all that because I think a consistent theme is you got to really plan for massive success and crowds and capacity, and how's it all going to work? And related to that, various people have said, basically be bolder, be more ambitious with the public space. Look at the dimensions between the floating pier and the crowd capacity situation, the built form versus the open space. In terms of areas around the pool, various people have suggested that the deck should be larger. Is there ability to add more deck? All these things related to success and capacity and crowds, and I think that's really going to be time well spent to anticipate that, because they're going to be unbelievable. A second theme was what was called enhance the publicness of the whole experience, which I really think is a great phrase. And just put a lens of publicness over all this and see where can you expand that public access experience, whether it is just from A to B or a circular pattern of walking all around. A lot of people want to go there just to look and sit and enjoy people watching and not go swimming. All those kinds of things are part of the publicness. So I think that's a second major theme. Other comments that are important about consideration of shade, screening, privacy around the pool, the relationship with the community center has just been stated. It needs to be thought more carefully, and the connections between the two. the servicing strategy to get, goods, food, et cetera, to the various facilities, back and forth, garbage, all those things are obvious, but they need to be considered. Also, Eric made an interesting comment about a place to get to where you can go down and touch the water, and especially little kids. I mean, I think, you all seen that. Well, a little kid puts his hand in the water, their feet, and then smile, and oh my God, what's this? So I think thinking about that would make it really, really attractive. In terms of, let me see what else here. All right, consideration of vegetation. We haven't heard anything about the vegetation strategy. Is it landscaping? Is there clusters of vegetation? Is it unique vegetation related to the lake itself? I don't know, but that's something that should be thought of, as well as inclusion of public art. And with respect to energy, very positive comments about solar, thermal, or using the heat from the lake water, which are really, really important. It's right there. So, and finally, Fatty's last comment, I really like phasing. Like, so this is going to happen. I don't know when, but maybe sooner, maybe later. But no government in their right mind would not fund this. It's going to be so popular. Just imagine we have a federal and provincial election within the next 2 years, roughly 2026, 2025, 2026. I don't care what the party is. They'll be dying to fund this. So what's the phasing? What's the strategy? What would you do first? What are the options for, is it the pool only? Is it something else first, et cetera, et cetera? And the very last thing I want to say is, you better submit your measurements for bathing suits, because the design panel, I'm sure, will want to enjoy this pool with Chris leading the charge at the very beginning.
What are you saying, Paul? Actually, I don't think I want you to answer that.
Anyway, thank you so much for the presentation, and obviously we're very supportive.